She was invisible until the day he saw everything. In a town where beauty was currency and strength was measured in cattle, Evelyn Carter had learned to disappear. While her younger sister collected marriage proposals like wildflowers, Evelyn counted inventory and swallowed her dreams. But when Dylan Cross rode into Copper Valley with land deeds in his pocket and determination in his eyes, everything she believed about her place in the world began to crack. Because the most powerful man in 3 territories didn't want the belle of the ball, he wanted the woman everyone else had learned to overlook. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The morning sun hit Copper Valley like a judgment, harsh and unforgiving, exposing every crack in the wooden storefronts that lined Main Street. Evelyn Carter stood behind the counter of Carter's General Store, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she reorganized the mason jars that had somehow gotten shuffled during yesterday's rush. 23 years old, and she could navigate this store blindfolded, knew every squeaking floorboard, every item's exact location, every customer's usual order before they opened their mouths. "Evelyn, Evelyn, where are you?" Her mother's voice carried from the back room, sharp with that particular brand of impatience that suggested Evelyn should have anticipated the need before it was voiced. "Right here, Mama." Evelyn set down feet at the jar of preserved peaches and wiped her hands on her apron. The fabric was worn thin at the edges, practical and plain like everything else about her. Margaret Carter emerged from the stockroom, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to pull her whole face tight. "Mrs. Henderson will be here within the hour for her weekly order. Make sure you include an extra pound of flour. She's hosting the church social this month." "Already set aside," Evelyn said, gesturing to the crate she'd prepared at dawn. "With the good flour, not the coarse." Her mother's expression didn't soften, but she gave a curt nod. "At least one of my daughters has sense." The words should have been a compliment, but they landed like always, a consolation prize, an acknowledgement of utility rather than value. As if summoned by the comparison, the back door swung open and Rosalie Carter swept in like springtime itself. At 19, she was everything Copper Valley held dear: golden hair that caught the light, blue eyes wide with practiced innocence, and a figure that made the town's young men stumble over their own boots. She wore a dress of pale yellow that Evelyn knew cost more than a month's store profits, custom ordered from San Francisco with money their father had left them. "Good morning," Rosalie sang out, her voice like honey over warm bread. "Isn't it just the most glorious day?" "It's Tuesday," Evelyn said, unable to keep the dryness from her tone. "Same as it was last week." Rosalie laughed, that tinkling sound that made men grin like fools. "Oh, Evie, you're so dreadfully practical. Don't you ever just feel the sunshine and let yourself be happy?" "I feel the sunshine burning my skin while I unload supply wagons," Evelyn thought. "I feel it exposing every plain angle of my face while you stand in the shade of admiration." But she said nothing, because what was the point? This was the natural order of their lives, as fixed as the mountains beyond town. Rosalie was the flower. Evelyn was the root system no one saw but everyone depended on. "Did you hear?" Rosalie continued, barely pausing for breath as she perched on the counter Evelyn had just cleaned. "There's a new man in town. Rode in last night, staying at the Empire Hotel. They say he's from Texas looking to buy land." Margaret's head snapped up. "A cattleman?" "That's what Mr. Jennings said. And he's young, not yet 30, and traveling with enough money to make the bank manager smile." Rosalie's eyes gleamed. "Apparently he's already met with half the landowners in the county." "Well," Margaret smoothed her apron with deliberate care, and Evelyn recognized the calculation forming behind her mother's eyes. "Rosalie, perhaps you should wear your blue dress today, the one with the lace collar, and make sure you're here this afternoon. Men like that always need supplies." Evelyn felt something twist in her chest, a familiar ache she'd learned to ignore. Of course. A new man of means meant a new opportunity for Rosalie, another chance to secure the future their mother had been orchestrating since Rosalie turned 50. Never mind that Evelyn ran the store, managed the accounts, and kept their family afloat. When it came to matters of marriage and position, she might as well have been furniture. "I can't this afternoon, Mama," Rosalie said, examining her nails. "Sarah Connolly invited me for tea, and half the ladies in town will be there. I absolutely must attend. Then, this morning, I'm only here to fetch my gloves. I left them yesterday." Rosalie hopped off the counter. Besides, Evie can handle any customers. She's so wonderfully efficient. There it was again. Efficient, capable, practical. All the words that meant useful but not desirable. After Rosalie departed in a swirl of yellow skirts and rose water perfume, the store settled into its usual rhythm. Evelyn served Mrs. Henderson, who talked for 30 minutes about her daughter's upcoming wedding. She helped old Tom Wright select tobacco, listening patiently as he told the same story about the winter of '72 that he told every week. She balanced the morning's receipts, noting with quiet satisfaction that they were up 3% from last month. Not that anyone would notice. Around noon, the bell above the door chimed. Evelyn looked up from the ledger, already forming her customer service smile, and felt the words die in her throat. The man who entered seemed to fill the entire doorway, though he wasn't exceptionally tall, perhaps just over 6 feet. He wore trail dust like a second skin, his dark hair curling slightly at the collar of his work shirt. But it was his face that caught her attention, weathered by sun and wind, with strong features that suggested stubbornness, and a mouth that looked like it knew how to smile but chose its moments carefully. His eyes, a startling gray-green, swept the store with the assessing gaze of someone who noticed everything. "Afternoon," he said, his voice carrying a Texas drawl that turned the simple greeting into something almost musical. "This is Carter's General Store?" "Yes, sir." Evelyn set down her pencil. "What can I help you with?" He moved further inside and she noticed the way he walked, purposeful but unhurried, like a man comfortable with his own presence. "I'm looking for supplies, basic provisions for the next few weeks. Flour, beans, coffee, salt, dried meat if you have it. Enough for 2 men and travel rations." "Of course." Evelyn came around the counter, grateful for the familiar task that gave her something to do with her hands. "Are you camping, or do you have a place nearby?" "Camping for now." He followed her to the dry goods section. "Looking at properties in the area. Might be here a while." So this was him, the Texas cattleman Rosalie had mentioned. Evelyn snuck another glance, trying to reconcile him with her imagination. He didn't have the polished look of the speculators who sometimes pass through, all fancy waistcoats and smooth talk. This man looked like he'd earned his money the hard way, and intended to keep earning it. "How much land are you looking at?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. That was probably too forward, too personal a question for a stranger. But he didn't seem offended. "Few thousand acres if I can find the right parcels. Good water access, decent grazing, not too remote but not boxed in by neighbors." He paused. "You know the area well?" "Born and raised here." Evelyn measured out flour with steady hands. "Most of the best grazing land is along Copper Creek and up toward the northern ridge. The Henderson property has good water, and I heard old Mr. Peterson might be willing to sell his eastern section. His son's moved to Denver, and he's tired of managing it alone." She could feel him watching her, and it made her self-conscious in a way she wasn't used to. Most people looked through her, not at her. "That's useful information," he said slowly. "Obliged to you." "Just geography." She kept her tone light. "Everyone around here knows it." "Maybe, but not everyone shares it with strangers." He extended his hand across the counter. "Dylan Cross." His hand was calloused and warm, and Evelyn felt an odd flutter in her chest that she firmly pushed down. "Evelyn Carter. My family owns the store." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Carter." He held her gaze a moment longer than strictly necessary, and something in his expression made her think he actually saw her, not just the store clerk, but the person behind the counter. Then the moment passed, and she was back to being efficient Evelyn, wrapping his purchases in brown paper and calculating costs. "That'll be $8.40, she said. Dylan counted out the money, then paused. "You mentioned the Peterson property. Would you happen to know if he's in town today? I'd like to speak with him before someone else gets the same idea." "He usually comes in Thursday mornings." Evelyn hesitated, then added, "But he takes his lunch at the Silver Dollar most days around 1 o'clock. If you're looking to have a conversation without half the town listening in, that might be your best chance." A smile tugged into the corner of Dylan's mouth, the first real expression she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, adding warmth to those assessing eyes. "You're full of useful information, Miss Carter." "It's a small town, Mr. Cross. Information is about all we have in abundance." He gathered his purchases but didn't immediately leave. "I appreciate your help. I suspect I'll be back. A man can only eat so many beans before he needs more supplies." After he left, Evelyn stood for a long moment staring at the door. Something about Dylan Cross had unsettled her, though she couldn't articulate exactly what. He'd been perfectly polite, even kind, but there had been something in the way he looked at her, as if she were a person worth noticing, worth remembering. She shook her head, returning to the ledger. Foolish thoughts. He was just another customer, and she was just the clerk. Whatever business brought him to Copper Valley, it had nothing to do with her. The afternoon crowd trickled in, farmers needing tools, women selecting fabric, children pressing their noses against the jar of peppermint sticks. Evelyn navigated it all with her usual competence, and if her mind occasionally drifted to gray-green eyes and a Texas drawl, well, no one needed to know. By the time she closed up at 6, her feet ached and dust coated her apron. She locked the front door, counting the day's receipts one final time before securing them in the small safe beneath the counter. The evening light turned everything golden, and for a moment she let herself pause, looking out at Main Street as it settled into twilight. This was her life. This store, this town, this narrow strip of existence between sunrise and sunset. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because wanting more, dreaming of more, only led to the kind of disappointment that hollowed you out from the inside. "Evelyn," Rosalie's voice drifted from upstairs, where they lived above the store. "Are you coming up? Mama wants to eat before the food gets cold." "Coming?" Evelyn called back, setting aside the day's thoughts along with her apron. But as she climbed the stairs, she couldn't quite shake the memory of how it felt to be seen, really seen, even for just a moment. And that small, dangerous ember of feeling scared her more than anything else could. The next morning dawned cooler, with clouds gathering on the western horizon that promised rain by evening. Evelyn opened the store at 6 sharp, as always, sweeping the front step and arranging the display of new goods that had arrived on yesterday's freight wagon. She didn't expect to see Dylan Cross again so soon. Men like him had important business, meetings with landowners and bankers. They didn't have time to linger in general stores. So when the bell chimed at 7:30 and he walked in, she couldn't hide her surprise. "Morning, Miss Carter." He touched his hat brim, a gesture that seemed old-fashioned and courteous. "I hope I'm not too early." "We're open." She wiped her hands on her apron, aware that she probably had dust in her hair from moving crates. "Did you forget something yesterday?" "Not exactly." He approached the counter with that same unhurried gait. "I took your advice about Mr. Peterson. Had a good conversation with him yesterday afternoon. He's willing to sell, and the terms are fair." That's wonderful." Evelyn felt a small glow of satisfaction. "I'm glad it worked out." "More than worked out. I'm meeting with 2 other property owners today, both contacts you gave me." He leaned against the counter, and she noticed he'd cleaned up since yesterday. Fresh shirt, hair still damp from washing. "Seems like the best source of information in this town is standing right in front of me." Heat crept up her neck. "I just know the area." "You know more than that." His eyes held hers. "You know the people, their situations, what they need. That's not just geography, Miss Carter. That's understanding." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she busied herself straightening the already straight row of tins behind the counter. "Well, I'm happy to have helped. Is there something you need today?" "Actually, yes." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I'm looking for someone who knows carpentry. Need to make some repairs on the Peterson place before I can move in. The barn needs reinforcing, and there's a fence line that needs complete replacement." "Jacob Miller is your best option," Evelyn said immediately. "He's fair with his prices and does solid work. His shop is on 3rd Street, the blue building with the white trim. Tell him I sent you. He'll give you an honest estimate." Dylan wrote down the information, but he didn't leave. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You don't think it's strange, do you? A stranger showing up and buying property?" "This is the frontier, Mr. Cross. Half the people here came from somewhere else. Strange would be if everyone stayed in one place their whole lives. But I'm not just passing through, I'm planning to put down roots. That makes people curious, sometimes suspicious." Evelyn considered her next words carefully. "People will talk regardless of what you do. If you're honest in your dealings and respect the community, most folks will come around. The ones who won't were looking for reasons to disapprove anyway." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight curve to his mouth. "That's a practical way of looking at things." "I'm a practical person. Are you?" The question seemed to mean more than its surface. From where I'm standing, you seem like someone who sees clearly but doesn't let others see you the same way. The observation hit too close to something Evelyn kept carefully hidden. She opened her mouth to deflect, but the door burst open, saving her from having to respond. Sarah Connolly rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. "Evelyn, is your sister upstairs? I have the most extraordinary news." "She's still sleeping," Evelyn said, grateful for the interruption. "Can I help you with something?" But Sarah's attention had already shifted to Dylan, and Evelyn watched the familiar transformation happen. The brightening of eyes, the straightening of posture, the smile that promised availability. "Oh, you must be Mr. Cross. Everyone's been talking about you." "Ma'am." Dylan's tone remained polite but noticeably cooler. "I'm Sarah Connolly. My father owns the freight company." She moved closer, effectively pushing Evelyn to the side. "I heard you're looking at the Peterson property. It's a beautiful piece of land. I've always thought it had such potential." "It suits my needs," Dylan said shortly. "Well, you simply must come to our gathering on Saturday. Everyone who's anyone will be there, and it would be the perfect opportunity for you to meet the community." Sarah's voice took on a conspiratorial tone. "Between you and me, there are several families with daughters of marrying age who would be very interested in meeting an eligible gentleman like yourself." Evelyn felt her stomach sink. Of course. This was how it always went. A man of means arrives, and suddenly he's the prize everyone's competing for. She'd watched it happen a dozen times, watched men who initially seemed interesting become just another trophy to be won by the prettiest face or the largest dowry. "I appreciate the invitation," Dylan said, "but I'm not looking to socialize just yet. Still getting my bearings." "Oh, but you must. It would be such a shame to miss it. Rosalie Carter will be there, Evelyn's sister, and she's simply the most beautiful girl in town. Everyone says so." Sarah finally glanced at Evelyn, as if just remembering she was there. "No offense, Evelyn. You know we all adore you. You're so wonderfully dependable." There it was again. Dependable. Like a good horse or a sturdy wagon. "None taken," Evelyn said, her voice carefully neutral. She caught Dylan watching her, that assessing look back in his eyes. Sarah chattered on for another few minutes, extracting a promise from Dylan to at least consider the Saturday gathering before finally sweeping out in search of Rosalie. The silence after her departure felt heavy. "I should let you get back to work," Dylan said finally. "I'm sure you have plenty to do." "Always." Evelyn managed a professional smile. "Good luck with the carpentry work." He started toward the door, then paused. "Miss Carter?" For what it's worth, I think dependable is a word people use when they can't see past their own assumptions. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her standing alone behind the counter with her heart beating strangely fast and her carefully constructed composure cracking at the edges. You see, the rest of the week passed in a blur of routine. Dylan Cross came by twice more, once for additional supplies, once to report that Jacob Miller had started work on the barn. Each visit was brief, professional, and yet somehow left Evelyn feeling unsettled in ways she couldn't name. Meanwhile, Copper Valley buzzed with speculation. Dylan had been seen meeting with the banker, dining at the Empire Hotel, riding out to survey his new property. He'd been cordial but distant, polite but not warm. And most intriguingly, he hadn't shown particular interest in any of the young women who'd made themselves conspicuously available. "It's so strange," Rosalie said Thursday evening as she tried on hats in front of the mirror in their shared bedroom. "Usually men at least pretend interest, but Mr. Cross seems completely indifferent." "Maybe he's actually here for business, not romance," Evelyn said from where she sat mending a torn hem on her work dress. "Men are always here for romance, even when they say they're not." Rosalie adjusted a particularly elaborate hat with feathers. "Sarah says he barely spoke to anyone at the general gathering yesterday, just stood to the side watching everyone else." Evelyn hadn't attended the gathering. She never did. They were Rosalie's domain, opportunities for her to shine while Evelyn maintained the store and kept the accounts balanced. It was an arrangement that suited everyone, or so she told herself. "Maybe he's shy," she offered. Rosalie laughed. "Men who buy 1,000-acre ranches are never shy. No, there's something else. Sarah thinks he might be running from something, a broken engagement perhaps, or a business gone wrong." Or maybe he just wants to be left alone to build his ranch. Evie, you're so naive sometimes. Rosalie turned from the mirror, her expression softening into something almost like pity. Men like Dylan Cross don't come to towns like ours just to be alone. They come because they're looking for something: land, opportunity, a fresh start. And eventually they all need the same thing: a wife to help build that new life. The words stung, though Evelyn couldn't have said why. Then I'm sure he'll find plenty of willing candidates. Oh, I'm not interested, Rosalie said airily, trying on another hat. He's handsome enough, but there's something too serious about him, too intense. I want someone fun, someone who makes me laugh. Besides, Charles Whitmore is coming back from Boston next month, and you know he's always been sweet on me. Evelyn bent back over her mending, the needle moving with practiced precision even as her thoughts wandered. She tried to imagine what it would be like to have Rosalie's confidence, that absolute certainty that you were worth wanting. What would it feel like to believe that someone might choose you not because you were useful, but because you were yourself? Foolish thoughts, dangerous thoughts. That night, she lay awake listening to the rain that had finally arrived, drumming against the roof with relentless persistence. Somewhere out there, Dylan Cross was probably in his hotel room, planning his future, building his dreams. And she was here, as always, in this narrow bed, in this narrow room, in this narrow life. It was enough. It had to be enough. But for the first time in years, Evelyn let herself wonder what it might feel like if it wasn't. Friday morning brought a break in the weather and an unexpected visitor. Evelyn was in the stockroom taking inventory of the tinned goods when her mother called down, "Evelyn, someone here to see you." She emerged, brushing dust from her skirt, and stopped short. Dylan Cross stood at the counter, and this time he wasn't alone. An older man accompanied him, weathered and rough around the edges, with the bow-legged stance of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. "Morning, Miss Carter," Dylan said. "This is my foreman, Jack Reeves. We're about to head out to the property, and I was hoping you might be able to help us with something." "Of course. What do you need?" "Information, mostly." Dylan unfolded a hand-drawn map on the counter. "I've been studying the water sources in the area. Peterson mentioned there's a natural spring on the northern boundary of the property, but he couldn't remember exactly where. Said his wife would have known, but she passed 2 years back." Evelyn leaned over the map, immediately recognizing the landmarks. "Here," she said, pointing. "About half a mile past the old stone marker. The spring feeds into Willow Creek. It's not much in summer, but it never runs dry, even in drought years." Jack whistled low. "That's good water. Reliable." "The best in the county," Evelyn confirmed. "The Petersons used to camp there when their children were young, Mrs. Peterson loved that spot. She said it was the prettiest piece of land in the valley." "You knew her?" Dylan asked. "Everyone knew Mrs. Peterson. She was kind." Evelyn's throat tightened unexpectedly. "When my father died 6 years ago, she brought us food for a month. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Said grief was hard enough without worrying about cooking." Something passed across Dylan's face, understanding perhaps, or shared loss. "Sounds like she was a good woman." "The best." Evelyn traced the map with her finger, suddenly eager to share this piece of knowledge, this connection to a woman who had shown her kindness when kindness was scarce. "There's an old oak tree near the spring. Huge thing, probably 200 years old. Mrs. Peterson carved her initials there on her wedding day. Said it was her way of putting down roots in this place." "I'd like to see that," Dylan said quietly. "Seems right to know the history of the land you're claiming." They spent the next 20 minutes poring over the map, Evelyn pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local knowledge that no surveyor's report would include. Where the ground got boggy in spring, which routes were passable in winter, where the fence lines had always been disputed. Jack seemed impressed, but Dylan looked at her with something else, a kind of focused attention that made her acutely aware of how close he was standing, how his sleeve almost brushed her arm when he pointed at the map. "You should work for the land office," Jack said finally. "No more than most of those desk clerks combined." Evelyn laughed, the sound surprising her. "I'm not sure they'd appreciate my methods. Most of what I know came from listening to Mrs. Henderson gossip and watching who rides which trails." "Sometimes the best information is the kind nobody thinks to write down," Dylan said. After they left, Evelyn found herself standing at the window, watching Dylan and Jack ride out toward the property. Her mother appeared beside her, arms crossed. "That's the second time this week that man has come specifically to talk to you," Margaret said. "People are noticing." "He's asking about local geography, Mama. Nothing more." Margaret's expression was unreadable. "Men don't ask just questions, Evelyn, especially not men with money and prospects." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you don't misunderstand the situation." Margaret's voice wasn't unkind, but it carried the weight of experience. "Men like Dylan Cross marry women like your sister. They ask advice from women like you. There's a difference, and it's important you remember it." The words hit like a slap, precisely because they echoed what Evelyn already believed. "I'm not misunderstanding anything." "Good." Margaret patted her shoulder, a rare gesture of affection. "You're a sensible girl, Evelyn. That's your strength. Don't forget it." After her mother left, Evelyn returned to the stockroom and let herself lean against the shelves, eyes closed. Sensible, dependable, practical. All the words that meant the same thing, not chosen. She could live with that. She had lived with it for 23 years. But increasingly, she wondered what it would take to be something more than just useful. To be seen not for what she could provide, but for who she actually was. And the most dangerous part was that Dylan Cross seemed to see that difference, even if he was the only one who did. Saturday afternoon, the store was unusually quiet. Most of the town was preparing for the evening social gathering at the Connolly house. Evelyn used the piece to reorganize the fabric section, refolding bolts of calico and gingham that customers had left in disarray. She heard the bell chime, but didn't look up immediately. "Be with you in just a moment." "No rush." Dylan's voice made her turn, surprise evident on her face. "Mr. Cross, I thought you'd be—" "That is, isn't there a gathering tonight?" "So I've been told, multiple times." He smiled, and again she was struck by how it transformed his features. "I'm starting to think the entire town has a conspiracy to get me to attend social functions. Small towns don't have much in the way of entertainment. A new person is cause for excitement." "I'm not much for excitement." He moved closer, examining the fabric display with what seemed like genuine interest. "My sister used to sew. Made all her own dresses. She'd spend hours picking out just the right fabric." The past tense didn't escape Evelyn's notice. "You have a sister?" "Had." The word carried weight. "Sarah. She died 4 years ago. Fever." "I'm sorry." "So am I." He touched a bolt of blue calico, his expression distant. "She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for pretense. Always said the best people were the ones who did their work without needing applause." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, letting the moment sit between them. Dylan seemed to shake off the melancholy. "Actually, I came because I need advice. I'm planning to hire help for the ranch. Hands, a housekeeper, maybe a cook eventually. I need people who are reliable and know the area. Who would you recommend?" They spent the next hour discussing local workers, their strengths and weaknesses, who might be looking for employment, who was trustworthy. Evelyn found herself relaxing into the conversation, appreciating the way Dylan listened, really listened, taking notes, asking follow-up questions, treating her opinions as valuable. The afternoon light shifted, growing golden, and still they talked. About the ranch, about Copper Valley, about the challenges of building something new in a place with established way. Dylan had ideas, progressive notions about land management and water conservation that most of the local ranchers would probably dismiss as foolish. "You'll face resistance," Evelyn said. "People here don't like change." "Do you?" The question caught her off guard. "Do I what?" "Like change. Or are you as set in your ways as everyone else?" Evelyn considered carefully. I think I'd like the opportunity to find out. Change implies choices, and most of us here don't get many of those. Don't or don't take them? Both." She met his gaze. "When your whole life is about survival, you don't have the luxury of taking risks." "Maybe." Dylan leaned against the counter. "Or maybe survival becomes an excuse not to try. Not everyone," he added quickly. "But some people." "That's easy to say when you have resources." When you're a woman in a frontier town with limited options, risk looks different. Fair point. He nodded slowly. Though I'd argue you've taken more risks than you give yourself credit for. What risks have I taken? You're talking to me right now, in a town that's already gossiping about why I keep coming to this store. His eyes held hers. You're giving me honest opinions instead of whatever you think I want to hear. You're treating me like a person instead of a prize to be won. That takes more courage than most people have. Heat flooded Evelyn's face. I'm just being myself. Exactly. Dylan's voice softened. And that's rarer than you think. The bell above the door chimed and Rosalie swept in, already dressed for the evening in a confection of pink silk that must have cost a fortune. She stopped short when she saw Dylan. Mr. Cross, what a lovely surprise! She glided forward, all charm and practiced grace. I thought you'd be getting ready for the gathering. Everyone's expecting you. I hadn't planned to attend, Dylan said, straightening from the counter. Oh, but you must. It would be such a disappointment if you didn't. Rosalie positioned herself between Dylan and Evelyn, effectively cutting her sister out of the conversation. I've been telling everyone about you, about your ranch plans. They're all simply dying to hear more. I'm sure they are. Dylan's tone was polite but cool. But I prefer to let my work speak for itself. How modest. Rosalie laughed, laying a hand on his arm. But truly, you should come. If not for the socializing, then at least for the food. Mrs. Connolly's cook makes the most divine apple tarts. Maybe another time, Rosalie pouted prettily, an expression that usually melted male resistance like butter in July. You're breaking my heart, Mr. Cross, and here I was hoping you'd save me a dance. I'm sure you'll have plenty of partners without me. Dylan stepped back, gently but firmly removing himself from her orbit. He looked past her to Evelyn. Thank you for your help this afternoon, Miss Carter. The information you provided will be invaluable. Any time, Evelyn managed. After he left, Rosalie turned to her sister with genuine confusion. That was the strangest thing. Did you see how he barely looked at me? Perhaps he's not interested in socializing. Every man is interested in socializing when a pretty woman invites him. Rosalie studied her reflection in the small mirror on the wall, as if checking to make sure her beauty was still intact. Do you think he's peculiar? Maybe he's one of those men who doesn't like women. Or maybe he's just not interested in being pursued. Don't be ridiculous. Men love being pursued. It makes them feel important. Rosalie smoothed her dress. Well, it doesn't matter. Charles Whitmore will be here next month, and he's much more fun anyway. Mr. Cross can be as serious and brooding as he likes out on his ranch. She swept back out, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts. Men love being pursued. Perhaps most men did. But Dylan Cross didn't strike her as most men. He struck her as someone who'd seen enough of life's surfaces to value its depths. And that terrified her more than anything else could, because it made her wonder, just for a dangerous, breathless moment, what it might mean if he saw depth in her. Sunday after church, Evelyn escaped to the one place she could usually find peace, the small library above the bank. It consisted of one room with 3 shelves of books, most donated by families moving through, or settlers who'd discovered that entertainment was heavy to carry across the plains. She was deep in a volume about crop rotation when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She looked up to find Dylan Cross in the doorway, looking slightly awkward in what was clearly his Sunday best, a suit that fit well but seemed to constrain him. Miss Carter? He seemed genuinely surprised. I didn't expect to find anyone here. Most people don't know this place exists. It's too quiet for general interest. She set down her book. What brings you here? Looking for information on water management systems. Someone mentioned there might be some agricultural journals. He gestured at the shelves, though I'm not seeing much. Back corner, bottom shelf. Evelyn rose, moving to show him. Mr. Harrison donated his collection before he moved back east. Nobody's touched them in 2 years. They were standing close together in the small space, and Evelyn was acutely aware of his presence, the faint scent of soap and leather, the way he had to duck slightly to avoid the low ceiling beam. Dylan pulled out a journal, flipping through pages. This is exactly what I needed. How did you know about these? I read them. He looked up sharply. You read agricultural journals? Is that so surprising? Yes. No, I don't know.
He laughed, the sound genuine. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised by anything about you at this point. What does that mean? It means you're not what I expected when I rode into this town. What did you expect? Dylan considered the question seriously.
Honestly, I expected to find people who fit into neat categories. The ambitious merchant, the social climber, the simple farmer. Easy to understand, easy to predict. He set down the journal. But you don't fit anywhere, do you? You run a store but read agricultural journals. You're practical but see things others miss. You're invisible? The word came out more bitter than she intended. No. Dylan's voice was quiet but firm. You're overlooked. There's a difference. Invisible suggests there's nothing to see. But you... He paused, seeming to search for words. You're like a book everyone judges by its cover without bothering to read. Evelyn's throat tightened. That's a kind thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. He leaned against the bookshelf. Can I ask you something? I suppose. Why do you let them? Let them what? Overlook you, underestimate you. Dylan's gaze was direct, challenging. You're smarter than half the people in this town combined, more capable than most, and you treat yourself like you should be grateful for whatever scraps of recognition they throw your way. The observation struck too close to something Evelyn never let herself examine. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. She wanted to. The urge to pour out years of resignation and acceptance, to articulate the careful calculus of survival she'd learned, was almost overwhelming. But the words stuck. It's not that simple, she finally said. Isn't it? You're 23 years old. You could leave, go anywhere, do anything. But you stay here, running a store, living in your sister's shadow, accepting that this is all you're worth. Why? Because this is life. The words burst out before she could stop them. This is what women like me get. We don't get grand adventures or passionate romances or men who... She stopped abruptly. Men who what? Evelyn turned away, hugging herself. Men who see us as anything other than convenient. The silence stretched. Then Dylan spoke, his voice gentle. I see you, Evelyn. The use of her first name sent a shiver through her. She forced herself to face him. You see someone useful. Someone who knows things you need to know. That's not the same as, I see someone remarkable. Dylan moved closer. Someone who's built a life of purpose in a place that doesn't value what she offers. Someone who's kind without expecting recognition, competent without demanding praise, and real in a world full of pretense. He paused. And yes, someone who's been overlooked for so long she doesn't know how to be seen. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to deflect, to laugh it off, to protect herself from the danger of hope. Why are you saying this? She whispered. Because someone should. Because it's true. Dylan didn't touch her, but she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. And because I'm tired of pretending I come to that store for supplies. The admission hung between them, terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Mr. Cross? Dylan, please. Dylan. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. This isn't... People will talk. They already are. Let them talk. You don't understand what that means for me, for my reputation. Don't I? His smile was sad. I understand that this town has decided I should court your sister, that I should follow the expected pattern, choose the beauty, build the perfect ranch, live the life everyone approves of. He shook his head. I spent 10 years in Texas doing what was expected, building what others thought I should build. And at the end of it, I had a successful ranch and an empty life. So you came here for a fresh start. I came here for something real. And the only real thing I've found in Copper Valley is you. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you see land not just as property, but as a living thing with history. I know you value competence over appearance, substance over charm. I know you're lonely in a crowded town because no one's bothered to know you the way you deserve to be known. His voice dropped. And I know that when I'm around you, I feel like I can finally breathe. This is madness, she whispered, but she didn't step away. Maybe. Or maybe it's the first sane thing either of us has done in a long time. The sound of voices on the street below broke the moment. Dylan stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I should go," he said. "But Evelyn, think about what I said. Not about me, but about yourself. About what you deserve. Because I don't think you've let yourself imagine that in a very long time." After he left, Evelyn sank onto the wooden chair, her hands shaking. Everything she'd carefully constructed, her acceptance, her resignation, her protection, had just cracked wide open. And for the first time in years, she didn't know if she was terrified or exhilarated by what might grow in those cracks. The week that followed felt like walking through water, every movement deliberate, every breath conscious, every moment weighted with an awareness that hadn't existed before. Evelyn moved through her days with her usual efficiency, but something fundamental had shifted, like a compass that had been pointing north her entire life, suddenly discovering a different direction. Dylan didn't come to the store for 3 days. Evelyn told herself it was a relief, that his absence proved the library conversation had been an anomaly, a moment of temporary insanity they'd both recovered from. But she caught herself watching the door, her heart jumping at every chime of the bell, and hated herself for the disappointment when it was just another ordinary customer. On Tuesday afternoon, Margaret sent her to deliver a special order to the Miller household on the edge of town. Evelyn welcomed the excuse to escape the store's confines, saddling their old mare and riding out under a sky that threatened rain but hadn't yet delivered. She was returning along the creek road when she spotted 2 figures working near the water's edge. Even from a distance, she recognized Dylan's silhouette, the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with purpose. Jack Reeves was with him, and they appeared to be surveying the creek bed, Dylan gesturing emphatically while Jack took notes. Evelyn meant to ride past unnoticed, but her mare had other ideas. The horse whinnied, and both men looked up. For a moment, Evelyn considered urging the mare forward, pretending she hadn't seen them. But Dylan had already raised his hand in greeting, and turning away would be more obvious than stopping. "Miss Carter," Dylan called as she approached. "You're out and about. Delivery run." She kept her voice carefully neutral, aware of Jack's presence. "I didn't mean to interrupt your work." "No interruption. We're just finishing up." Dylan wiped his hands on his work pants. "Jack, why don't you head back and mark those measurements on the main map? I'll catch up." Jack tipped his hat to Evelyn and headed toward 2 horses tethered nearby, leaving them alone in the fading afternoon light. "You've been avoiding the store," Evelyn said before she could stop herself. "I've been giving you space." Dylan moved closer, one hand on her mare's bridle. "I said too much the other day. Pushed too hard. You said what you meant. Doesn't mean I should have said it. Not like that. Not so fast." He looked up at her, and she was struck again by the directness of his gaze. "I scared you." It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "Yes. I'm sorry for that. Not sorry for what I said, but sorry for making you uncomfortable." The distinction mattered somehow. Evelyn dismounted, needing to be on level ground for this conversation. The mare wandered a few feet away, content to crop grass. "Why me?" The question had been eating at her for days. "You could have anyone. Women far prettier, more accomplished, better connected. Why would you choose to notice me?" Dylan was quiet for a moment, watching the creek water slide past. "You really don't know, do you? You genuinely can't see what I see. Then tell me, because from where I'm standing, this doesn't make sense." "All right." He turned to face her fully. "You want honesty?" "The first day I walked into that store, you looked at me like I was a person, not a prospect. You answered my questions without calculating what I wanted to hear. When I mentioned land, you didn't simper or flutter. You gave me useful information because you thought it would help, not because you expected something in return." "That's just being decent." "No, that's being real. And in my experience, genuine people are rare." Dylan leaned against a cottonwood tree. "I spent 10 years building a ranch in Texas, successful, operation, profitable, everything I'd worked for. And I was courted by half the eligible women in 3 counties, all of them seeing dollar signs and status, none of them seeing me." "Surely that's not—" "I was engaged once," he interrupted. "Beautiful woman, perfect on paper. 3 weeks before the wedding, I overheard her talking to her mother. She was laughing about how dull I was, how serious, but that it didn't matter because the ranch would give her the life she wanted. The marriage was a transaction to her. I was just the means to an end." Evelyn felt something twist in her chest. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me what I didn't want. His eyes found hers. When I decided to start over, I promised myself I wouldn't settle for surface again. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who sees me as a prize to be won or a problem to be solved. So you came to Copper Valley. I came looking for land and found something more valuable, someone who doesn't care about my bank account or my prospects, someone who talks to me about water management and local history like it matters, who treats me like a human being instead of a trophy. He paused. Someone who's spent so long being overlooked that she's forgotten she's worth seeing. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything Evelyn thought she knew about herself. It's not that simple, she said quietly. You don't understand what it's like being the one who's always second choice, always the practical option, never the desired one. I've watched men fall over themselves for my sister while barely registering my existence. I've accepted that's how things are. Have you accepted it, or have you just stopped fighting? The question hit harder than it should have. What difference does it make? All the difference. Dylan moved closer, his voice intense. Accepting means finding peace with circumstances. But you're not at peace, Evelyn. You're resigned. There's a world of difference between those two things. You presume to know a lot about me after a few conversations. I know what I see. I know that when you talk about something you care about, the land, the store, even the people in this town, your whole face changes. You come alive, and then you catch yourself and pull back like you're not allowed to care that much, to want that much. His frustration was evident. Someone taught you to make yourself small, and you've gotten so good at it that you think it's who you are. Evelyn felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that made her want to flee. Even if that's true, what am I supposed to do about it? I can't change how people see me. No, but you can change how you see yourself. You can stop accepting the scraps they throw you and start demanding what you're worth. And what am I worth? The question came out raw, all the years of doubt and diminishment packed into 4 words. Dylan closed the remaining distance between them. More than this town has ever given you credit for. More than you've given yourself credit for. His voice softened. You're worth someone's full attention, Evelyn. Their whole heart, not just the part left over after they've pursued prettier options. You're worth being chosen first, not settled for. Tears burned behind Evelyn's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. Pretty words, but words are easy. Then let me prove it with actions. Dylan's intensity could have been frightening, but somehow it wasn't. Let me court you properly. Let me show you that I mean every word I've said. People will talk. They already are. Let them talk. My mother will disapprove. She has plans for Rosalie, and those plans don't include someone like you paying attention to me instead. With respect to your mother, her plans aren't my concern. You are. The whole town expects. I don't give a damn what the town expects. Dylan's voice was firm, but not harsh. I didn't leave Texas and start over just to live down to other people's expectations. I came here to build something real, and that includes how I live my life and who I choose to spend it with. The word choose resonated in Evelyn's chest. To be chosen, not settled for. To be seen, not overlooked. The possibility was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. No one's ever. Neither have I. Not really. Not in a way that mattered. Dylan smiled slightly. We'll figure it out together, if you're willing. Evelyn looked at him. Really looked. At the weathered face that had seen hardship and chosen to keep going. At the eyes that saw her, truly saw her, without filters or assumptions. At the hands that built and created instead of taking. He was offering something she'd stopped letting herself want, and the fear of accepting it was almost paralyzing, but the fear of refusing it, of letting this chance pass and spending the rest of her life wondering what if, that fear was worse. All right, she said, the words barely audible. Yes. Something lit in Dylan's expression, not triumph, but relief mixed with joy. Yes? Yes. Stronger this time, but slowly and carefully, because if this goes wrong, I'm the one who'll pay the price in this town, not you. Fair enough? He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was warm and solid. "We'll do this at whatever pace you need. I'm not going anywhere." They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the creek murmuring beside them, and the sky beginning to purple with approaching dusk. Evelyn felt something crack open inside her, not breaking, but opening, like a door that had been locked so long she'd forgotten what lay beyond it. "I should get back," she said finally. "Mother will worry." "Of course." Dylan released her hand, but not before giving it a gentle squeeze. "May I call on you properly at the store or your home?" "The store is safer, less complicated." "The store it is." He helped her remount, his hand steadying at her elbow. "Thursday afternoon, around 3?" "Thursday at 3. Evelyn gathered the reins, then looked down at him. "Dylan, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting me." She rode back toward town as the first drops of rain began to fall. But for once, Evelyn barely noticed the weather. Her mind was full of gray-green eyes and words that had rearranged something fundamental in her understanding of herself. The rain came in earnest by the time she reached the store, soaking through her dress and plastering her hair to her face. She stabled the mare quickly and entered through the back, hoping to slip upstairs unnoticed and change into dry clothes. But Margaret was waiting in the stockroom, arms crossed, an expression severe. "You're late and soaking wet. Got caught in the rain on the way back from Miller's." Evelyn peeled off her wet shawl. "I'll change and be right down to help with closing." "Evelyn." Her mother's tone stopped her halfway to the stairs. "I heard something today from Sarah Connolly. She says her cousin saw you talking to Dylan Cross out by the creek. Alone." Evelyn's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. "I ran into him while riding back. We spoke briefly. For 15 minutes. Sarah's cousin was quite specific about the duration." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing, Evelyn?" "I'm not doing anything. We talked. That's all." "That's not all, and we both know it. That man has been coming to this store with increasing frequency, always asking specifically for you. Now he's seeking you out on empty roads. People are noticing, and they're talking. Let them talk. Don't be foolish." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "You know how these things work. If there's gossip about you and it comes to nothing, you're the one who will be damaged. Rosalie's reputation could suffer by association. Our whole family's standing in this community is built on me running this store while Rosalie collects admirers," Evelyn interrupted, surprising herself. "I'm well aware of the arrangement." Margaret's face flushed. "That's unfair. We've all made sacrifices since your father died. You think I wanted to raise 2 daughters alone in this harsh place? You think Rosalie enjoys being paraded around like a prize mare? We do what we must to survive." The anger drained out of Evelyn as quickly as it had risen. Her mother was right. They'd all done what was necessary, but necessary didn't mean she had to be grateful for it. "Dylan Cross wants to court me," she said quietly. "Properly. He asked, and I said yes." Margaret stared at her for a long moment. "You can't be serious." "I am." "Evelyn, listen to me carefully. Men like Dylan Cross don't court women like you. They court women like Rosalie. If he's paying attention to you, it's because he wants something, information, connections, a way into local society. Once he has what he needs, he'll move on to someone more appropriate." The words stung precisely because they echoed Evelyn's own fears. "You don't know that." "I know how the world works. I know that men marry for beauty or money or connections. You have none of those things in sufficient quantity to interest a man of his prospects. Maybe he's different." "They're never different. They just hide it better." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I'm not trying to be cruel, darling. I'm trying to protect you. The higher you climb, the harder you'll fall when this ends. And it will end. Men like him always choose women like Rosalie in the end." Evelyn felt something harden in her chest, a determination she hadn't known she possessed. "Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But I won't refuse this chance just because you think I don't deserve it." "It's not about deserving, isn't it?" Evelyn met her mother's eyes. "Isn't it always about what I deserve versus what Rosalie deserves? She deserves the pretty dresses and the social events and the admiration. I deserve the work and the responsibility and the practical marriage someday to someone sensible who needs a capable wife. That's how you've always seen it. Because that's reality. I'm trying to help you avoid heartbreak by accepting less than I'm worth. By settling before anyone even offers me more. Evelyn's voice shook but held steady. I've done that for 23 years, Mama. Maybe it's time I tried something different. She didn't wait for a response, just climbed the stairs to her room, leaving wet footprints on the wooden steps and her mother standing in shocked silence below. In her small bedroom, Evelyn changed into dry clothes with shaking hands. Through the thin wall, she could hear Rosalie humming, oblivious, as always, to the storms raging around her. Her sister lived in a different world, one where men's attentions were expected and futures were bright. But tonight, for the first time, Evelyn didn't envy that world. She had her own storm to navigate, her own future to build. And terrifying as it was hers. The next morning brought a tense silence at breakfast. Margaret moved around the kitchen with tight-lipped efficiency, while Rosalie chattered about the upcoming spring dance, blissfully unaware of the previous night's confrontation. Everyone who's anyone will be there, Rosalie was saying, spreading jam on her toast with elaborate care. Sarah says they've hired a real band from Denver. Can you imagine? Real music, not just old Mr. Patterson on his fiddle. Sounds lovely, Evelyn said automatically, her mind elsewhere. You should come, Evie. I know you usually don't, but it might be fun. There will be decent food, at least. Rosalie paused, a slight frown creasing her perfect forehead. Actually, Sarah mentioned that Dylan Cross has been asked to attend. By several people, apparently. They really want him to feel welcome in the community. Margaret's knife clattered against her plate. I'm sure Mr. Cross will do whatever he thinks appropriate. Something in their mother's tone made Rosalie look up sharply. Is something wrong? You both seem terribly tense. Nothing's wrong, Evelyn said quickly. Just tired. Late night with inventory. Well, you work too hard. That's your problem. Rosalie returned to her toast, the moment forgotten. Anyway, I think I'll wear my blue dress. The one with the ivory trim. Charles Whitmore arrives next week, and I want to look my best. After breakfast, Evelyn opened the store alone. Margaret had declared she had business elsewhere, which meant she was still angry. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of customers and commerce, but Evelyn found her attention drifting to Thursday, counting down the hours until 3 o'clock. Around 11, the bell chimed, and Pastor Williams entered. He was a round man with kind eyes who'd known Evelyn since childhood. Morning, Evelyn. Need to order supplies for the church social next month. They went through his list, flour, sugar, coffee, and Evelyn assembled the order with practiced ease. But as she wrapped the packages, Pastor Williams cleared his throat in that particular way that meant he had something uncomfortable to say. Evelyn, I hope you don't mind some advice from an old friend. Her guard went up immediately. What kind of advice? I've heard some talk around town about you and the new rancher, Dylan Cross. He held up a hand before she could speak. I'm not here to judge or scold, but I've seen many young women in my years here, and I'd hate to see you hurt. Everyone seems convinced I'm going to get hurt. Because we care about you. You're a good woman, Evelyn, steady and kind, but men of means, men who come from elsewhere. They often have different expectations than our local young men. They're used to a certain type of woman, and I'm not that type. Yes, I've heard this speech several times now. Evelyn wrapped the last package with more force than necessary. Does anyone in this town think I might actually be worthy of his attention? Or is everyone just waiting for me to be humiliated? Pastor Williams looked genuinely distressed. That's not what I meant. You're worthy of any man's attention. I just want you to be careful with your heart. My heart has been careful for 23 years, Pastor. Maybe it's time it took a risk. She regretted the sharpness of her tone immediately. Pastor Williams meant well. They all meant well. But she was tired of being protected from possibilities, sheltered from chances, warned away from hope. After he left, Evelyn leaned against the counter and closed her eyes. Was she being foolish? Was everyone right and she was walking blind into heartbreak? But then she remembered the way Dylan had looked at her by the creek, the certainty in his voice when he'd called her remarkable. Either he was the best liar she'd ever met, or he meant it. And she had to believe he meant it, because the alternative was returning to the gray half-life she'd been living, and she wasn't sure she could do that anymore. Wednesday afternoon, as Evelyn was arranging a display of new fabric, two women entered the store. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Talbot, pillars of Copper Valley society and notorious gossips. Evelyn, dear, Mrs. Henderson cooed, we were just talking about you. Nothing good ever followed those words. Were you? How kind. We're concerned, dear. We've heard disturbing rumors. Mrs. Talbot leaned in conspiratorially. About you and that cross man. People are saying he's been paying you particular attention. Mr. Cross is a customer. He asks questions about the area, and I answer them. For 15 minutes alone by the creek? Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. That seems excessive for simple questions. We ran into each other. We talked. There's nothing scandalous about that. Of course not, dear. But appearances matter, and the appearance is that a wealthy single man is spending considerable time with you while completely ignoring more suitable young ladies. Mrs. Talbot's smile didn't reach her eyes. We just worry about your reputation, and your sister's by extension. There it was, the real concern. Not Evelyn's welfare, but Rosalie's prospects. I appreciate your concern, Evelyn said with forced politeness. But my reputation and my sister's are both perfectly intact. For now, Mrs. Henderson said darkly. But if this continues and nothing comes of it, well, people will draw conclusions. They'll say you threw yourself at him, chased him inappropriately, and when he eventually courts someone more appropriate, those whispers will follow you. Follow your whole family. After they left, Evelyn wanted to scream or cry or throw every jar on the shelves against the wall just to hear something break. But she did none of those things. She just stood there, hands gripping the counter edge, breathing deliberately until the rage passed. This was the price of stepping out of her assigned place. Not just her mother's disapproval or the pastor's concern, but the entire town's judgment. They'd accepted her as the practical one, the capable one, the one who ran the store and kept things running smoothly. But attempting to be anything more than that threatened their comfortable categorizations. That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard her mother's warning. Men like Dylan Cross don't court women like you. She heard Mrs. Henderson's prediction. When he eventually courts someone more appropriate. She heard a lifetime of being told, in countless small ways, that she should be grateful for what she had and not reach for more. But she also heard Dylan's voice. You're worth being chosen first, not settled for. Thursday arrived with clear skies and the kind of spring warmth that made everything feel possible. Evelyn dressed with more care than usual, choosing her best day dress. Still plain, still practical, but clean and pressed. She braided her hair neatly and even added a ribbon Rosalie had given her last Christmas, pale blue and probably too frivolous, but it made her feel slightly less ordinary. Margaret noticed, You're dressed up for store work. I'm always presentable for customers. This is more than presentable. This is... Margaret trailed off, her expression troubled. Evelyn, please reconsider. It's not too late to send him a polite message saying you've changed your mind. I haven't changed my mind. Then at least be smart about this. Don't let him call on you publicly until you're certain of his intentions. Make him work for your attention. Play the game properly. I don't know how to play games, Mama. I only know how to be honest. Honesty is a luxury women in our position can't afford. The words hung between them, sad and true and infuriating all at once. Before Evelyn could respond, Rosalie appeared, ready for her own afternoon plans. Oh, Evie, you look so pretty. Is that my ribbon? It looks lovely on you. Rosalie kissed her cheek with genuine affection. I'm off to the Connollys. Don't work too hard. She swept out, trailing rose water and innocence, and Evelyn felt the familiar pang of contradictory emotions. Love and resentment, protectiveness and envy, all tangled together in a knot she could never quite untangle. The store was unusually busy that afternoon, as if the whole town had conspired to fill it with people precisely when Dylan was expected. Evelyn served customers with mechanical efficiency, aware of curious glances and barely concealed interest. Word had spread. Everyone wanted to see if the rumors were true. 3 o'clock came and went, then 3:15. Evelyn's stomach knotted. Had he changed his mind? Realized his mistake? Or had the town's pressure gotten to him, made him reconsider the wisdom of courting the overlooked sister? At 3:30, she was helping Mrs. Miller select thread when the bell chimed. She looked up, and there he was. Dylan had dressed for the occasion, clean shirt, pressed pants, boots polished, but it was his face that caught her attention, determined, slightly nervous, but utterly resolved. He met her eyes across the crowded store, and in that moment, Evelyn knew. Whatever doubts she'd had, whatever fears had kept her awake, his expression answered them all. He crossed the store deliberately, ignoring the interested stares, the sudden lull in conversation. When he reached the counter, he removed his hat and smiled. "Miss Carter, I apologize for my tardiness. Jack needed help with the fence line, and it took longer than expected." "It's all right." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm just finishing with Mrs. Miller." She completed the transaction with trembling fingers, aware of every eye in the store watching them. Mrs. Miller paid and left reluctantly, clearly hoping to witness whatever came next. Dylan waited until the store had mostly cleared, though several women lingered by the fabric display, pretending to examine cloth while clearly eavesdropping. "I was hoping," Dylan said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by interested parties, "that you might allow me to call on you regularly, with your mother's permission, of course. I find your company valuable, and I'd like to know you better." The formal phrasing was deliberate, proper, respectable, leaving no room for scandalous interpretation. Evelyn felt a rush of gratitude for his understanding of what this moment required. She glanced at Margaret, who had appeared from the back room, her face unreadable. "I would like that, but perhaps you should discuss it with my mother first." Dylan turned to Margaret with perfect courtesy. "Mrs. Carter, I apologize for not approaching you sooner. I'd like your permission to court your daughter. My intentions are entirely honorable, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about my circumstances or character." Margaret's jaw worked for a moment before she spoke. "This is rather sudden, Mr. Cross." "Yes, ma'am, it is. But when a man recognizes something valuable, he doesn't waste time." Dylan's voice was respectful, but firm. "I'm established here now. I have land, resources, and solid prospects. I'm 28 years old, I've never been married, and I have no debts or entanglements. I'm a hard worker, and I treat people fairly. You can verify any of this with the bank or any of the landowners I've dealt with." It was a pitch-perfect courtship declaration, hitting every note a mother would want to hear. Margaret's resistance visibly wavered. "And why my daughter, specifically?" The question was sharp. "Because she's remarkable." Dylan's answer was simple and direct. "She's intelligent, capable, honest, and kind. She knows this land and its people. She sees clearly and speaks truthfully. Those are qualities I value above all others." The women by the fabric display had given up all pretense of shopping now, openly listening. This declaration would be all over town by sunset, Evelyn knew. But looking at Dylan's face, seeing the absolute certainty there, she found she didn't care. Margaret looked between them, calculation and concern warring in her expression. Finally, she sighed. "Very well, Mr. Cross, you may call on Evelyn. Here at the store, in public view, at appropriate hours. We'll see how things progress from there." It wasn't wholehearted approval, but it wasn't rejection either. Dylan's smile was genuine. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your trust." After he left, promising to return the next afternoon, the store exploded with barely suppressed excitement. The lingering customers rushed to the counter with questions disguised as innocuous comments. "Well, that was quite a declaration," Mrs. Patterson said, her eyes gleaming. "Very proper of him." "And what land did he say he'd purchased?" another woman asked. "The Peterson place, that's prime property." They wanted details to feed the gossip mill, but Evelyn gave them nothing beyond polite acknowledgments. Eventually they drifted out, already composing the stories they'd tell. When the store finally emptied, Margaret turned to her daughter. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I don't," Evelyn admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway. He's smooth. I'll give him that. Said all the right things." "He meant them." "Maybe he did, today." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I'm not trying to steal your happiness, Evelyn. I just don't want to see you shattered when this doesn't turn out how you hope. What if it does turn out? What if I'm not wrong about him? Then I'll be happy for you, truly." Margaret touched her daughter's cheek briefly. "But prepare yourself for disappointment, just in case. Hope for the best, but protect your heart." It was the most maternal advice Margaret had offered in years, and Evelyn found herself fighting tears. "I'll try." That evening, as Copper Valley settled into twilight, Evelyn stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, Dylan was probably on his new land, building his new life. And somehow, impossibly,
She was becoming part of that story. The fear was still there. She'd be a fool to ignore it. But alongside the fear was something else, something she'd almost forgotten existed: anticipation. The sense that tomorrow might bring something worth waking up for, that the future might hold more than just endless repetition of today. Below, she heard Rosalie return home, heard her cheerful voice recounting her afternoon to their mother. In the past, Evelyn would have felt that familiar ache of comparison, of being less than. But tonight, she just felt grateful for Rosalie's genuine sweetness, for Margaret's reluctant permission, for her own courage in saying yes when every instinct had screamed to protect herself. She was stepping into unknown territory, and the town was watching, waiting for her to fail. But she was stepping forward anyway, and that alone felt like victory. The days that followed took on a rhythm Evelyn had never experienced before, a pattern built not around duty and survival, but around stolen moments and carefully constructed hope. Dylan came to the store every afternoon at 3, as regular as clockwork, and each visit felt like learning a new language, one where she was finally allowed to speak. Their conversations happened in full view of whoever happened to be shopping, which meant half the town witnessed the courtship unfold. Dylan would lean against the counter while Evelyn worked, discussing everything from water rights to book recommendations, from ranch management to childhood memories. He asked her opinions on matters most men would never have consulted a woman about, and listened to her answers like they carried weight. "You're thinking about expanding the herd too quickly," Evelyn said one afternoon, her hands busy folding fabric while Dylan described his plans. "The grazing land needs another season to recover from Peterson's overuse. Push it too hard now and you'll damage it for years." "Most men would tell me to maximize profits immediately," Dylan observed. "Most men think short-term. Land requires long-term thinking." She glanced at him. "But you already knew that. You're just testing me." His smile was slow and warm. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like hearing you talk about things you understand. Your voice changes when you discuss land management, gets more confident, more animated." "That's not very romantic," Evelyn said, heat rising in her cheeks. "Isn't it? I think watching someone be fully themselves, doing what they're good at, that's the most romantic thing in the world." These moments, these small revelations, accumulated like rainwater in a barrel. Each conversation added another layer to Evelyn's understanding of who Dylan was. Not the persona he presented to the town, but the person underneath. He was ambitious but not ruthless, confident but not arrogant, solitary but not cold. He'd lost people he loved and carried those losses quietly. He read poetry when he couldn't sleep and had opinions about crop rotation that most ranchers would mock as too progressive. And he looked at Evelyn like she was the most interesting person he'd ever met. The town's reaction evolved from skepticism to fascination. Women who'd previously barely acknowledged Evelyn now stopped her on the street with thinly veiled questions. Was Mr. Cross planning to stay permanently? Had he mentioned his financial situation? What were his intentions exactly? "They're treating you like you're suddenly worthy of attention," Rosalie observed one evening as they prepared dinner. "It's strange. You're the same person you were a month ago. But my prospects have changed. That's what matters to them." Evelyn stirred the pot with more force than necessary. "They don't care about me. They care about proximity to someone important. That's cynical. That's realistic." Evelyn softened her tone. "Not everyone's like you, Rosalie. You're genuinely kind to people regardless of their status. Most aren't." Rosalie was quiet for a moment, an unusual occurrence. "Do you love him, Dylan?" The question caught Evelyn off guard. "It's only been 2 weeks." "That's not an answer." "I don't know yet. I care for him. I think about him constantly. When he's here, everything feels more vivid, more real. When he's not, the world goes back to being gray." Evelyn met her sister's eyes. "Is that love?" "I think it's the beginning of love." Rosalie smiled gently. "And I'm happy for you, Evie, truly. You deserve someone who sees you." The sincerity in her voice made Evelyn's throat tight. "Thank you. Though I'll admit it's strange being the one not courted for once." Rosalie laughed. "Charles Whitmore arrives next week and suddenly I'm nervous. What if I've been coasting on my looks so long I've forgotten how to actually connect with someone?" It was the most self-aware thing Evelyn had ever heard her sister say, and it shifted something between them.
A recognition that they'd both been trapped by the town's expectations, just in different ways. But not everyone was pleased with the developing courtship. Sarah Connolly cornered Evelyn in the store 3 weeks in, her smile sharp as a knife. "You've certainly landed on your feet," Sarah said, examining a bolt of silk with affected casualness. "Everyone's talking about how clever you've been." Clever? Playing the long game, making yourself indispensable with all that helpful local knowledge, positioning yourself as the practical choice. Sarah's tone dripped with false admiration. "It's actually quite brilliant. Men like Dylan Cross need useful wives, and you've certainly proved your usefulness." The words were designed to wound, to reduce everything between her and Dylan to calculation and transaction. Evelyn forced herself to remain calm. "I haven't played any game, Sarah. I've just been myself." "Of course you have." Sarah set down the silk. "But you might want to enjoy it while it lasts. The spring dance is in 2 weeks, and word is that several very beautiful, very eligible women from Denver will be attending. Fresh faces, you know. Sometimes men realize what they're settling for once they see better options." After Sarah left, Evelyn gripped the counter edge until her knuckles went white. The poison had been delivered with surgical precision, finding every insecurity Evelyn had tried to bury. Was Dylan settling? Would he wake up one day and realize he could have done better? The questions circled like vultures. That afternoon, when Dylan arrived, Evelyn was quieter than usual. He noticed immediately. "Something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong." "Evelyn." His voice was gentle but firm. "Talk to me." She wanted to brush it off, but the words came tumbling out before she could stop them. "Are you settling for me? Choosing the practical option because it's sensible, even if it's not what you really want?" Dylan's expression shifted from concern to something harder. "Who said that to you?" "It doesn't matter. Just answer the question." "Sarah Connolly?" When Evelyn didn't deny it, he cursed under his breath. "That woman has been trying to manufacture interest between me and half the unmarried women in this county since I arrived. I've turned her down politely a dozen times, and apparently she's decided to take it out on you." "That doesn't answer my question." Dylan looked around the store, currently empty except for them, and made a decision. He reached across the counter and took both her hands in his, propriety be damned. "Listen to me carefully. I'm not settling. I'm choosing. There's a universe of difference between those two things." His grip tightened. "If I wanted beautiful but vapid, I could have that. If I wanted well-connected but shallow, that's available too. I don't want those things. I want someone real. Someone who challenges me and surprises me and makes me want to be better than I am. I want you." "But no buts. You think I don't know what people are saying? That I'm an idiot for overlooking your sister, that I must have ulterior motives, that I'll come to my senses eventually?" His voice was intense. "Let them think what they want. I know what I want, and it's you. Not despite who you are, but because of who you are." Evelyn felt tears threatening. "The dance is in 2 weeks. Sarah said there will be beautiful women from Denver." "There are beautiful women everywhere." "I don't care." Dylan released one of her hands to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek with heartbreaking tenderness. "You could parade every eligible woman in Colorado in front of me, and I'd still choose you every single time." "How can you be so sure?" "Because in 10 years, when beauty fades and social connections shift, I'll still want someone I can talk to. Someone who understands this land and shares my values. Someone who will tell me the truth even when it's hard to hear." His eyes held hers. "I'll still want you, Evelyn. That's how I know." The bell above the door chimed, breaking the moment. Dylan stepped back quickly, and they both turned to see Mrs. Henderson entering, her eyes widening at whatever she'd witnessed. "Mrs. Henderson," Evelyn said, her voice remarkably steady. "What can I help you with?" The older woman's gaze darted between them, calculating. Just picking up my weekly order." After she left, practically running in her haste to spread this new development, Dylan touched Evelyn's hand briefly. "I'm sorry. That was indiscreet of me." "I don't care." And surprisingly, she didn't. Let them talk. Let them speculate. For the first time in her life, Evelyn had something worth the gossip.
That evening, Margaret pulled Evelyn aside after dinner, her expression troubled. Mrs. Henderson came to see me this afternoon. She says Dylan was familiar with you in the store, touching your face, holding your hands. He was comforting me. Someone had said something cruel, and he was responding to my distress. Evelyn, you have to be more careful. People are watching for any hint of impropriety. If they think you're allowing liberties before there's a formal engagement, maybe I don't care what they think anymore. Evelyn's voice was quiet but firm. I've spent my whole life being careful, being proper, making sure I never gave anyone reason to criticize. And what did it get me? They criticized anyway. At least now I'm being criticized for something real. Margaret looked at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time. You've changed. Yes, I have. Evelyn met her mother's eyes, and I'm not going back to who I was before. The following week brought unexpected validation. Evelyn was organizing the new shipment of supplies when Jacob Miller entered the store, his weathered face serious. Miss Carter, got a moment? Of course, Mr. Miller. What can I do for you? It's what I want to do for you, actually. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. I've been working on Dylan Cross's property for 3 weeks now. Building, repairs, that sort of thing. And I've heard talk in town about you two, some of it not so kind. Evelyn's stomach sank. I see. No, you don't. I'm not here to add to it. I'm here to say that man talks about you like you hung the moon. Every day, multiple times a day, he finds ways to mention you. Asks my opinion on things, then says, Evelyn thought the same thing, or Evelyn suggested something similar. It's not calculation or strategy. It's genuine. Tears pricked Evelyn's eyes. Thank you for telling me that. He's a good man. Fair, honest, treats his workers right, and he's absolutely taken with you. Miller smiled slightly. My wife wanted you to know. She's tired of hearing people question his intentions when anyone with eyes can see he's sincere. After Miller left, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of pure relief. The doubt Sarah had planted hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had lost some of its power. That afternoon, Dylan arrived with an unusual request. Come riding with me tomorrow, not just around town, out to the ranch. I want to show you what I'm building, what I hope we're building. The implication in those words, the suggestion of a shared future, made Evelyn's heart race. That might be seen as improper. Being alone with you out there. Bring your mother as chaperone if you need to, or Rosalie, or anyone you trust. His expression was earnest. I just want you to see it, to understand what I'm working toward and why it matters. Tomorrow's Sunday. The store is closed. Evelyn made her decision quickly before fear could override courage. I'll come. Just the two of us. If people want to talk, they'll talk regardless. Dylan's smile was brilliant. I'll pick you up at 9. That night, Evelyn barely slept. She lay awake planning what to wear, practical riding clothes, nothing fancy, but clean and presentable. She thought about what seeing his ranch would mean, what statement it would make to the town when word got out that she'd gone alone with him. She thought about the future he'd implied, the life he was inviting her to imagine. And for once, instead of fear, she felt anticipation. Sunday morning dawned clear and perfect, the kind of spring day that made everything seem possible. Evelyn dressed carefully, braided her hair in a practical coronet, and came downstairs to find both her mother and sister waiting. You're really going, Margaret said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. People will assume he's proposing, taking you out there, showing you the property. It's a clear statement of intent. Margaret's voice wasn't disapproving, just resigned. If he doesn't follow through after this, your reputation will be damaged. I know. And you're going anyway? Yes. Rosalie hugged her suddenly, fiercely. Be happy, Evie. You deserve it so much. When Dylan arrived with 2 horses, Evelyn was ready. He helped her mount, his hand steadying at her waist, and they rode out of town just as people were heading to morning services. She felt the weight of watching eyes, but refused to look back. The ride took 40 minutes, following Copper Creek north into gradually rising terrain. Dylan pointed out property boundaries and explained his plans, where he'd build additional corrals, how he'd manage water distribution, which sections he'd reserve for hay cultivation. But mostly, they just rode in comfortable silence, and Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, some tension she'd been carrying for years finally releasing.
The ranch house sat on a gentle rise overlooking the valley. It was modest, 2 stories, practical design, nothing fancy, but well-built and solid. Newly repaired fencing stretched across rolling grassland, and in the distance, Evelyn could see the spring he'd asked her about weeks ago, water glinting in the sunlight. "It's not much yet," Dylan said as they dismounted, "but it will be. 5 years, maybe 10, and this will be one of the finest ranches in the territory." "It's already beautiful." Evelyn turned slowly, taking in the vista. "You can see why Mrs. Peterson loved this land. Come inside." He led her to the house, opening the door to reveal rooms that were sparsely furnished but clean and filled with light. "I know it's empty now, but I keep imagining how it could be. A proper kitchen with good windows for light. A library. I have 200 books in storage, waiting for shelves. A workshop for whatever hobbies we'd want." "We?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. Dylan turned to face her fully. "Yes, we. Because I'm not building this for myself alone, Evelyn. I'm building it for us, for the life I hope we'll have together. Dylan, I'm not proposing, not yet. I know it's too soon, and I want to do this properly." His hands flexed at his sides, as if he wanted to reach for her but was holding himself back. "But I need you to know that's where this is heading. I need you to decide if you can imagine yourself here, in this life, with me." Evelyn walked to the window, looking out at land that rolled toward distant mountains. She could imagine it, could see herself in this house, managing the domestic side of the ranch, while Dylan handled the livestock and land. Could picture winter evenings by the fire, summer mornings, watching sunrise paint the valley gold. Could imagine a life built on partnership and respect instead of mere survival. "I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "That I'll wake up, and this will have been a dream. That you'll realize you've made a mistake. That I'm not enough for this life you're building." She turned to face him. "I'm not beautiful like Rosalie. I'm not charming or graceful. I'm just practical, capable. What if that's not enough?" Dylan crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was solid and warm, and Evelyn let herself lean into it, her face against his chest, where she could hear his heartbeat. "You're enough," he said against her hair. "You're more than enough. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for." His arms tightened. "I don't want easy beauty that fades or superficial charm that wears thin. I want someone who'll stand beside me when things are hard, who'll tell me the truth when I'm being foolish, who'll build something lasting because she understands what matters." "How do you know I'm that person?" "Because I've watched you keep your family afloat for 6 years with no complaint. I've seen you treat every customer with dignity, from the richest landowner to the poorest farmer. I've witnessed you give good advice to people who barely thank you for it. You're strong in ways most people never have to be, and you do it without fanfare or expectation of reward." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "That's the person I want beside me, not despite who you are, but because of exactly who you are." Evelyn felt something inside her finally, fully break, not in pain, but in release. All the years of holding herself apart, of accepting less, of believing she wasn't worthy of being chosen first. It cracked open, and in the space it left, hope grew. "I can imagine it," she whispered, "being here, building this with you. I can see it." Dylan's smile was like sunrise. "That's all I needed to hear." They spent the afternoon walking the property, Dylan explaining his plans while Evelyn offered suggestions refined by years of observing what worked and what didn't in this harsh climate. They found the old oak tree where Mrs. Peterson had carved her initials, now grown over with bark but still faintly visible. They sat by the spring and ate the lunch Dylan had packed, simple food made perfect by the setting and the company. "The spring dance is next week," Dylan said as they prepared to ride back. "I'd like to take you, officially, publicly, as my chosen partner." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "That will make a statement." "That's the point. I want everyone in Copper Valley to know exactly where I stand. No ambiguity, no room for speculation." His gaze was steady. "Unless you're not ready for that." "I'm ready." And surprisingly, she was. Though Sarah Connolly will probably combust. Let her. She's been a thorn in my side since I arrived, trying to orchestrate introductions with every eligible woman in 3 counties. About time she learned to mind her own business. They rode back as the sun began its descent, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. When they reached town, people were out for evening walks, and Evelyn saw the exact moment they were spotted, saw the whispers start, saw the glances exchanged. Dylan noticed too, and deliberately rode closer to her, making sure everyone saw them together. At the store, he helped her dismount with exaggerated courtesy, his hand lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for today," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "For trusting me with your fears and for imagining a future with me. Thank you for building something worth imagining." Inside, Margaret was waiting, her expression unreadable. She studied Evelyn's face for a long moment. "You're glowing. I've never seen you look like this." "I'm happy, Mama. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely happy." Margaret's eyes glistened. "Then I'm happy for you. Even if it terrifies me, even if I worry about what happens if it goes wrong, I'm happy you're finally getting something you want." That night, the three Carter women sat together over tea. And for once, the conversation wasn't about duty or survival or what they had to do to get by. They talked about the future, about possibilities, about hope. Rosalie was excited about Charles Whitmore's impending arrival, but there was a new thoughtfulness to her anticipation, as if watching Evelyn's courtship had shown her a different model for relationships, one built on depth rather than surface attraction. The week leading up to the spring dance felt simultaneously endless and too short. Dylan came to the store every day, their conversations gradually shifting from careful to comfortable, from formal to familiar. They were learning each other's rhythms, discovering the small incompatibilities that would need accommodation and the larger compatibilities that made those minor differences irrelevant. The town's gossip reached a fever pitch. Some people were scandalized, others fascinated, and a determined few remained convinced that Dylan would come to his senses before making any permanent commitment. Sarah Connolly made a point of mentioning loudly and frequently how many beautiful women would be attending the dance. "She's desperate," Rosalie observed the night before the event. "Charles Whitmore has been paying me attention, but she wanted him for herself. And she'd set her sights on Dylan before you claimed him. She's lost twice, and she's bitter." "I didn't claim anyone, we chose each other." "That's not how Sarah sees it. She thinks you stole opportunities that should have been hers." Rosalie helped Evelyn brush out her hair. "You know she's going to try something tomorrow night, right? Some dramatic scene or revelation designed to embarrass you." "Let her try." Evelyn's voice was steadier than she felt. "I'm done living in fear of other people's opinions." The morning of the dance dawned with the kind of spring perfection that seemed designed for celebration. Evelyn spent the day working the store, but her mind was elsewhere, anticipating the evening with a mixture of excitement and dread. She'd chosen her dress carefully. Not as elaborate as Rosalie's confections, but a deep green that brought out the few gold flecks in her brown eyes. It was simple but well made, appropriate without being ostentatious. She looked, she thought, like herself, just a slightly more polished version. Dylan arrived at 6 sharp, dressed in a dark suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to gentleman without losing any of his essential character. His face when he saw her made every hour of preparation worthwhile. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "I'm presentable." "You're beautiful," he repeated, taking her hand. "Stop arguing with me about your own worth." The dance was held at the Connolly house, their largest room cleared of furniture to create a dance floor. By the time Dylan and Evelyn arrived, it was already crowded with half the county in attendance. The band from Denver was playing something lively, and the air smelled of spring flowers and expensive perfume. The moment they entered together, conversation stuttered and stopped. Every eye in the room turned to watch Dylan Cross escort Evelyn Carter to the dance floor, his hand at the small of her back, his attention focused entirely on her. Sarah Connolly stood near the refreshment table, her expression poisonous. Clustered around her were several women Evelyn didn't recognize, the Denver contingent, presumably, imported specifically to tempt Dylan away. They were beautiful in the polished, sophisticated way of city women, and for a moment, Evelyn's old insecurities surged. Then Dylan pulled her into a waltz position, and the rest of the room faded away. "Ignore them," he murmured. "Just focus on me." They danced, and Evelyn let herself surrender to the moment. She wasn't graceful like Rosalie. Her steps were merely competent rather than flowing, but Dylan led her confidently, making her feel more capable than she was. Around them, other couples gradually joined the dance floor, and the party resumed its rhythm, though she could still feel curious eyes tracking their movement. After 2 dances, they retired to the refreshment table, where Sarah immediately pounced. "Mr. Cross, how lovely that you could attend. I'm desperate to introduce you to some dear friends who've come all the way from Denver." She gestured to the cluster of beautiful women who smiled in practiced unison. "Ladies, this is Dylan Cross, the rancher I've been telling you about." "A pleasure," Dylan said politely but coolly. He didn't release Evelyn's hand. The tallest of the women, a striking blonde in an emerald dress, stepped forward. "Mr. Cross, Sarah says you've acquired the Peterson property. That's one of the finest pieces of land in the territory. You must be very ambitious." "I prefer the term hard-working, Miss Montgomery, Victoria Montgomery. My father owns Montgomery Mining. Perhaps you've heard of it." "Can't say I have, sorry." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, it's one of the largest operations in Colorado. I'm here visiting Sarah and thought it would be lovely to meet some of the local characters." The pause before characters was deliberate, the condescension barely veiled. Evelyn felt Dylan tense beside her. "This is Evelyn Carter," he said, his voice taking on an edge. "My companion for the evening. Her family owns the general store in town. But more importantly, she knows more about this land and its people than anyone I've met, including me." "How practical," Victoria said, her gaze raking over Evelyn's simple dress with thinly disguised disdain. "Yes, she is," Dylan agreed, completely missing or deliberately ignoring the insult. "It's one of the many qualities I admire about her." Sarah's expression soured further at Dylan's deliberate praise, and she exchanged a loaded glance with Victoria. The other Denver women shifted closer, forming a semicircle that seemed designed to physically exclude Evelyn from the conversation. "How fascinating that you value practicality so highly," another woman chimed in, a petite brunette with calculating eyes. "Though I must say, Mr. Cross, Sarah has told us all about your ranch ambitions. Building an empire requires more than just practical knowledge. It requires the right social connections, the ability to entertain properly, to represent the family name in refined circles." "My ranch ambitions," Dylan said, his voice hardening, "require good land management, honest workers, and a partner who understands what it takes to build something that lasts. I'm not interested in empire building or social climbing. I left that nonsense back in Texas." "How charmingly rustic," Victoria murmured, and several of her companions tittered. Evelyn felt her face burn, but before she could formulate a response, Rosalie appeared at her elbow, looking like an avenging angel in pale blue silk. "Mr. Cross, Evelyn, how wonderful to see you both." Rosalie's smile was pure sunshine, but her eyes held steel. "I see you've met Sarah's friends from Denver. Such a pity they have to return tomorrow. Hardly enough time to appreciate what our little town has to offer." "Tomorrow?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. "That is quick." "Oh yes. Victoria was just telling me earlier that she can't bear to be away from civilization for more than a day or two." Rosalie's voice dripped false sympathy. "Something about the dust and the lack of proper culture. Though personally, I think some people are simply too delicate for frontier life. It takes real strength to thrive here." The implication was clear, and Victoria's porcelain complexion flushed with anger. "I assure you, Miss Carter, I'm quite capable of handling adversity when necessary." "How lovely for you." Rosalie linked her arm through Evelyn's. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Charles Whitmore just arrived, and I promised to introduce him to my sister. Mr. Cross, you'll join us, of course?" She swept them away before anyone could protest, navigating through the crowd with the grace of someone born to social maneuvering. Once they were safely on the other side of the room, Rosalie leaned in close. "Those vipers were circling for the kill. I couldn't just stand by and watch." "Thank you," Evelyn said, her voice unsteady. "Though I'm not sure I handled that very well." "You handled it fine. You didn't need to handle it at all." Dylan made his position crystal clear. Rosalie squeezed her arm. "Did you see their faces when he kept praising you? Sarah looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole." Charles Whitmore proved to be everything Rosalie had described: tall, handsome, charming, and genuinely interested in what people had to say. He greeted Evelyn warmly and shook Dylan's hand with firm respect. "I've heard quite a bit about your ranch acquisition," Charles said. "The Peterson property is choice land. You've got a good eye." "I had good advice," Dylan replied, glancing at Evelyn. "Local knowledge is invaluable when you're starting fresh somewhere new." They talked for several minutes about ranching and business, and Evelyn found herself relaxing slightly. Charles treated her as an equal part of the conversation, asking her opinions on water rights and land use, clearly valuing her input. It was refreshing after the veiled hostility from Sarah's circle. But the evening's drama wasn't over. As the night wore on and the crowd grew warmer with punch and dancing, Sarah made her move. She positioned herself near the band during a break in the music and called for everyone's attention. The room gradually quieted, curious faces turning toward their hostess. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," Sarah began, her voice carrying artificial sweetness. "As many of you know, we're here to welcome new members to our community and celebrate the bonds that make Copper Valley special." Her gaze found Dylan and Evelyn. "Speaking of new members, I thought it would be wonderful to share some exciting news. Mr. Dylan Cross has been courting one of our own, and I think we should all show our support for this unexpected development." The word unexpected carried weight, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Evelyn felt Dylan tense beside her. "In fact," Sarah continued, "I thought it might be lovely to hear from Mr. Cross himself about his intentions. After all, when a man of his standing pays attention to a woman, we naturally wonder if there's an announcement forthcoming. Mr. Cross, would you care to share your plans with us?" It was a trap, elegantly laid. If Dylan demurred, it would suggest his intentions weren't serious, confirming all the gossip that he was merely using Evelyn. If he made a public declaration without having properly proposed, it would pressure them both and potentially damage their relationship. Either way, Sarah won. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on Dylan. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment her mother had warned her about, the precipice where everything could crumble. Dylan stood slowly, his face unreadable. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, then at the assembled crowd, and finally at Evelyn. Something shifted in his expression, resolve settling into place. "You're right, Miss Connolly. It's time for clarity." He turned to face the room fully, his voice carrying to every corner. "I came to Copper Valley looking for land and a fresh start. What I found was far more valuable than property. I found someone who sees the world clearly, who values substance over surface, who built a life of purpose in a place that didn't always recognize her worth." He moved to stand beside Evelyn, taking her hand in full view of everyone. "I've been courting Evelyn Carter because she's the most remarkable person I've ever met. She's intelligent, capable, honest, and kind. She knows this land and its people. She treats everyone with dignity regardless of their station. She's strong in ways most people never have to be." His voice dropped slightly but remained audible. "And yes, since Miss Connolly has forced the issue, I'll say it plainly. My intentions are entirely serious. I'm building a life here, and I want Evelyn to be part of that life. Not as a convenience or a practical choice, but as my chosen partner. The woman I love." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The word love hung in the air like a declaration of war against every expectation, every assumption, every whispered doubt. Dylan turned to Evelyn, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room disappear. "I wasn't planning to do this here, like this. I wanted privacy and romance and the right words. But since we're putting cards on the table," he released her hand and, to her absolute shock, dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the Connolly parlor. "Evelyn Carter, you've changed everything about how I see the world and what I want from life. You make me want to be better, do better, build something that matters. I love you, not for what you can do for me, but for who you are. Will you marry me?" The silence was absolute. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat, feel the weight of 100 stares, sense the entire trajectory of her life balanced on this single moment. Every instinct screamed caution. They'd only known each other 6 weeks. People would say he was impulsive, that she was opportunistic. Her mother would worry about the haste. The town would gossip for years. But looking at Dylan's face, at the vulnerability and certainty combined there, Evelyn realized that caution had never gotten her anything worth having. Caution had kept her small and safe and slowly suffocating. This man was offering her a chance to be fully alive, fully seen, fully chosen. And if she turned that down out of fear, she'd regret it for the rest of her life. "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper at first, then stronger. "Yes, I'll marry you." Dylan's face split into a brilliant smile. He stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that was probably scandalous but felt absolutely perfect. The room erupted, some in applause, some in shocked murmurs, some in what sounded distinctly like dismay. Sarah Connolly looked like she might actually faint. Victoria Montgomery's mouth hung open in undisguised horror, but Rosalie was crying happy tears, and Margaret, Evelyn caught sight of her mother near the back of the room, wore an expression of stunned acceptance, as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd just witnessed, but was choosing to embrace it anyway. Dylan set Evelyn down but didn't release her, his hands framing her face. "I don't have a ring yet. I was going to order one from Denver, something worthy of you." "I don't need a ring right now. I just need you to mean this." "I mean every word. I've never meant anything more in my life." He kissed her then, a brief press of lips that was chaste by some standards but felt revolutionary in the context of frontier propriety and public declaration. The crowd surged forward, some to congratulate, others to gawk, still others to express their shock more or less politely. Charles Whitmore clapped Dylan on the shoulder, grinning widely. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen, and I honestly can't decide which." "Both probably," Dylan admitted. "But I'm tired of playing games and following arbitrary rules. Life's too short." Mrs. Henderson pushed her way through, her expression torn between scandal and delight. "Well, I never expected such directness, though I suppose it answers all the speculation." "That was the idea, ma'am," Dylan said evenly. Pastor Williams appeared next, his round face creased with concern. "Mr. Cross Miss Carter, while I'm happy for you both, I hope you'll allow for a proper engagement period. These things shouldn't be rushed." "We'll be married within a month," Dylan interrupted, not rudely, but firmly. "I see no reason to wait longer than necessary for the banns to be read and arrangements to be made." "A month?" The pastor looked faint. "But that's hardly sufficient time to plan a wedding," Evelyn finished, surprising herself. "We don't need anything elaborate, just family, close friends, and simple vows." She was speaking with a decisiveness that felt foreign, but right, making choices instead of accepting whatever was decided for her. Dylan squeezed her hand, approval and pride evident in his expression. Margaret finally reached them, her face a complicated map of emotions. "Evelyn, might I speak with you privately?" "Mama, if you're going to try to talk me out of this, I'm not." Margaret's voice was firm. "I'm going to tell you that I was wrong. About you, about him, about what you deserve. I spent so long trying to protect you from disappointment that I taught you to expect nothing. I'm sorry for that." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "Mama, let me finish. That man just stood in front of everyone we know and declared his love for you. He risked public humiliation if you'd said no. He chose you in the most visible way possible, burning every bridge back to safer options." Margaret took Evelyn's hands. "That's not settling. That's choosing. And you were right to say yes." They embraced, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt her mother's full support, unqualified by caution or comparison. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Well-wishers and gossips alike demanded details. Sarah Connolly disappeared early, her grand gesture having backfired spectacularly. The Denver women left shortly after, their mission obviously failed. But most of Copper Valley stayed, and gradually, the shock transformed into something approaching genuine celebration. Rosalie dragged Evelyn aside during a lull, her eyes sparkling. "You realize you've just become the most talked-about woman in 3 territories, right? By tomorrow, everyone within 100 miles will know Dylan Cross proposed at the spring dance." "I know. It's terrifying. It's perfect. You've always hidden yourself away, but now the whole world has to acknowledge you." Rosalie hugged her fiercely. "I'm so proud of you, Evie. You took what you wanted instead of waiting for permission." "I learned from watching you, actually. You've never apologized for taking up space." "Maybe we've both been learning from each other." Rosalie pulled back, her expression thoughtful. "Charles asked if he could call on me properly, and for the first time, I found myself wondering if I actually like him or just like being admired. Watching you and Dylan, what you have is so much deeper than surface attraction. Don't settle for less than real, Rosalie. You deserve that too." As midnight approached, Dylan walked Evelyn and her family home through streets that felt transformed by the evening's events. At the store's entrance, he kissed Evelyn's hand with old-fashioned gallantry. "I'll come by tomorrow morning," he said. "We have plans to make." "Yes, we do." Evelyn smiled, feeling the unfamiliar weight of joy. "Thank you for choosing me. Publicly, irreversibly, without hesitation. Thank you for letting yourself be chosen, for saying yes when you could have played it safe." His thumb traced her knuckles. "I know it was scary. The scariest thing I've ever done, and the best." After he left, Evelyn climbed the stairs to her room, her mind racing too fast for sleep. She stood at the window, looking out at the darkened town, and marveled at how completely her life had changed. 6 weeks ago, she'd been invisible, resigned to a narrow existence. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her, planning a future she'd never dared imagine. But Monday morning brought reality crashing back. The store opened to a flood of customers, not all of them there to shop. Some came to congratulate, their pleasure apparently genuine. Others came to probe for details with thinly veiled nosiness. And a determined few came to express their disapproval, barely masked as concern. Mrs. Talbot was the worst. "A month engagement? That's unseemly, Evelyn. People will talk. They'll say you had to marry quickly, if you understand my meaning." "People will talk regardless of what I do," Evelyn replied calmly. "They always have. At least now they're talking about something real. But to marry a man you've only known 6 weeks? My parents knew each other 3 weeks before they married. It worked out fine for 20 years. Evelyn met the woman's eyes steadily. "Dylan and I are both adults. We've chosen each other with full awareness of what we're doing." After Mrs. Talbot left in a huff, Margaret touched Evelyn's shoulder. "You handled that well, better than I would have at your age. I'm tired of defending my choices to people whose approval doesn't matter." "Good. That's exactly the right attitude." Margaret hesitated. "Your father would have liked him, I think." "Dylan. He would have approved of someone who values your mind." It was the first time in years Margaret had mentioned her husband without pain clouding her voice, and Evelyn felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I think so too." Dylan arrived mid-morning with Jack Reeves in tow, both men looking serious. They closed the door to the stockroom for privacy, and Dylan's expression was grave. "There's something you need to know. Sarah Connolly has been spreading rumors, saying I only proposed because you trapped me, that I was cornered into it publicly and couldn't back out without looking like a cad." Anger flared hot in Evelyn's chest. "That's absurd. She forced the situation, not me." "I know that. Anyone with sense knows that. But she's found some receptive ears." Dylan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I'm telling you because I don't want you blindsided. And because I need you to understand something. I proposed last night because she pushed me into declaring myself earlier than I'd planned, but I was always going to propose. The timing changed, not the intention." "I believe you." "Do you? Really?" His eyes searched hers. "Because if there's any doubt—" "No doubt." Evelyn took his hands. "You've shown me who you are through weeks of consistent action. One night doesn't erase that, and Sarah's bitterness doesn't change the truth." Jack cleared his throat. "If I may, Miss Carter, I've been working with Dylan for months now. The man's been half distracted thinking about you since the day he met you. Last night wasn't strategy. It was inevitability." Dylan shot his foreman an exasperated look. "Thank you for that completely unnecessary elaboration." "Just speaking truth, boss." Jack grinned unrepentantly. "Someone's got to counter the lies being spread." Over the next 2 weeks, life became a whirlwind of wedding preparations balanced against store management and the constant undercurrent of town gossip. Some people warmed to the match, won over by Dylan's obvious devotion and Evelyn's steady competence. Others remained convinced it would end in disaster, watching with barely concealed anticipation for cracks to appear. Evelyn discovered planning a wedding was far more complicated than she'd anticipated. There were decisions about the ceremony location, the guest list, the meal afterward. Margaret wanted traditional elements. Evelyn wanted simplicity. Dylan just wanted it done so they could start their life together. "I don't care about flowers or decorations," he said one afternoon, helping Evelyn reorganize the store's inventory while they talked. I care about you becoming my wife. Everything else is just window dressing. But people expect certain things. People expected me to court your sister. I've stopped caring what people expect. He set down a crate. What do you want, Evelyn? Not what your mother wants, not what the town expects. What matters to you? She thought carefully. I want it to feel real, not performative. I want to stand in front of people who actually care about us and make promises that mean something. I don't need elaborate decorations or expensive food. I just need you and words that capture what we're promising each other. Then that's what we'll have. Dylan pulled her close, heedless of the fact that customers might enter any moment. Simple ceremony, honest vows, real commitment. Everything else is negotiable. They settled on a ceremony in the small garden behind the church, followed by a modest gathering at the store. Margaret initially protested the lack of formality, but even she was won over when she saw how much less stressed Evelyn became with simpler plans. Rosalie threw herself into helping with enthusiasm, turning dress selection into an adventure. She dragged Evelyn to every shop in town and even ordered fabric samples from Denver. You're not wearing brown or gray, Rosalie declared. This is your wedding, not a funeral. We're finding something that makes you feel beautiful. They eventually settled on a dress of cream silk with simple lines and minimal embellishment. It wasn't fancy by Rosalie's standards, but when Evelyn tried it on, even she had to admit it transformed her. The color warmed her complexion, and the cut somehow made her look elegant rather than merely serviceable. You look like yourself, Rosalie said softly. Just the best version. That's perfect. Charles Whitmore continued courting Rosalie, but their relationship had a different quality than her previous flirtations. He treated her as more than a beautiful ornament, engaging her in actual conversations, valuing her opinions. And Rosalie, watching Evelyn's relationship with Dylan, seemed to be demanding more substance from her own romantic prospects. He asked me what I think about water rights policy, Rosalie reported one evening, sounding bemused. An actual opinion on actual policy. It's strangely refreshing. Welcome to being seen as a whole person, Evelyn said dryly. Is this what you've wanted all along? To be valued for your thoughts rather than your appearance? Isn't that what everyone wants? To be valued for who they actually are? Rosalie was quiet for a moment. I think I've been afraid that if people looked past my appearance, they wouldn't find anything worth valuing. It's easier to be admired from a distance than known up close. The vulnerability in her sister's voice made Evelyn's heart ache. There's so much more to you than you've let anyone see. Charles seems to realize that. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just learning to let him see. Rosalie smiled slightly. We're both changing, Evie. You're stepping into visibility, and I'm stepping into depth. It's strange and scary and somehow right. 3 weeks into the engagement, Dylan took Evelyn back to the ranch to discuss practical matters, where she'd want the kitchen organized, what furniture they'd need, how to manage the domestic side while he handled the livestock and land. But halfway through the conversation, Dylan suddenly changed topics. I need to tell you something about my past. Something I should have told you before now. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What is it? I told you my sister died. What I didn't tell you was that she died because I wasn't there. His voice was raw. She got sick while I was away on a cattle drive. By the time I got home, it was too late. She died calling for me, and I wasn't there to hold her hand or tell her she was loved. Dylan, I left Texas because I couldn't stand being in places that reminded me of her. Every corner of that ranch held memories, and they were killing me. He looked at Evelyn with naked pain. I came here to escape that, to build something new where the ghosts couldn't follow, but I'm still carrying the guilt, the fear that I'll fail someone else I love. Evelyn moved to him, taking his face in her hands. You didn't fail her. You were doing your job. You couldn't have known. My head knows that. My heart doesn't believe it. Then I'll remind you until your heart catches up. She kissed his forehead gently. You're not going to fail me, Dylan. And even if things go wrong, because life is unpredictable and harsh, we'll face it together. You won't be alone with your grief this time. He pulled her into his arms, holding tight, and she felt him shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. We deserve each other. We deserve happiness after everything we've both survived. She held him until the shaking stopped. Thank you for trusting me with this. I needed you to understand why I might sometimes be overprotective, why I might worry more than seems reasonable. It's not because I don't trust your competence, it's because I can't lose someone else I love. Then we'll work on that together. But Dylan, I need you to hear this. I'm strong. I've survived 6 years of running a household and business with minimal support. I'm not fragile. You don't have to protect me from normal life. I know. I do know that. He kissed her hair. But knowing and feeling are different things. Then we'll figure it out as we go, together. The final week before the wedding passed in a blur of last-minute preparations and mounting excitement. Evelyn found herself almost unable to sleep, her mind racing through all the changes coming. She'd be leaving the room she'd slept in for 23 years, the store she'd run for 6, the life she'd built from duty and necessity. She'd be stepping into something new and unknown, and the terror was almost equal to the anticipation. The night before the wedding, Margaret came to Evelyn's room and sat on the edge of the bed like she had when Evelyn was small. "I have something for you." She pulled out a small velvet box. "This was your grandmother's. She wore it on her wedding day, and she gave it to me to wear on mine. Now I'm giving it to you." Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a single pearl. Simple but beautiful. "Mama, I can't." "You can and you will. You're starting a new life tomorrow, but you carry the strength of all the women who came before you. My mother survived the journey west. I survived losing your father and building a life anyway. You've survived being overlooked and underestimated. We're strong women, Evelyn. This necklace is a reminder of that." Evelyn felt tears spill over. "What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough for the life he's offering?" "Then you'll figure it out and try again. That's what we do. We adapt, we persist, we survive." "But Evelyn," Margaret's voice softened, "I don't think you'll fail. I think you're going to thrive in ways none of us imagined, because you're finally in an environment that values what you have to offer." They held each other for a long moment, and Evelyn felt years of complicated mother-daughter tension ease into something simpler and warmer. Her wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with spring flowers blooming wild and the air carrying promises of summer. Evelyn dressed carefully, her hands steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Rosalie helped with the final touches, pinning Evelyn's hair up in a style that was elegant but not fussy. "You're glowing," Rosalie said, fastening the pearl necklace. "I've never seen you look like this." "I'm terrified." "Good. That means it matters." Rosalie hugged her carefully, avoiding crushing the dress. "Go marry your rancher, Evie. Go build something beautiful." The ceremony was small and intimate, just as they'd planned. Maybe 40 people gathered in the church garden, family, close friends, and a handful of townspeople who genuinely cared. Dylan waited at the front, looking nervous and proud and absolutely certain. And when Evelyn walked down the short aisle on her mother's arm, his face transformed with joy. Pastor Williams kept the ceremony brief and meaningful. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about partnership and truth, about building something lasting, about choosing each other daily. When Dylan slipped a simple gold band on her finger, Evelyn felt the weight of it like an anchor and wings simultaneously. "I love you," he whispered as they were pronounced married. "I'll love you until the day I die." "I love you too. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting me." The kiss was sweet and brief and witnessed by everyone who mattered, and when they turned to face their small audience as husband and wife, Evelyn felt something settle into place inside her, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she belonged. The gathering afterward was simple but joyful. Margaret had organized food with help from several women in town, and the store's back room was transformed into something almost festive with wildflowers and borrowed linens. People ate and laughed and offered advice and congratulations in equal measure. Charles Whitmore pulled Dylan aside at one point, and Evelyn watched them talk seriously for several minutes. When Dylan returned, he was smiling. "He's going to propose to your sister. Asked my blessing as your brother-in-law," which was oddly formal but touching. Dylan took Evelyn's hand. "Looks like both Carter sisters are getting their happy endings." "I hope so. She deserves someone who sees past her surface. She's lucky to have you as an example, watching you demand to be valued for who you are. I think that taught her she could want the same thing." As afternoon shifted toward evening, Dylan pulled Evelyn aside. "Ready to go home?" The word home resonated through her chest. Not her mother's apartment above the store, not the narrow room she'd inhabited for 23 years, but a new place she'd build with this man who'd chosen her. "Yes, I'm ready." They said their goodbyes, accepting hugs and well wishes from the people who genuinely cared. Margaret held Evelyn extra long. "Be happy," she whispered. "That's all I want for you now." As they rode out of town toward the ranch, Evelyn looked back once at Copper Valley, at the place that had held her small for so long. Then she turned forward, toward the mountains and the future and the life waiting to be built. Dylan rode beside her, solid and certain, and for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt fully seen, fully chosen, fully alive. The doubts were still there. She'd be a fool to ignore them completely. This was still new, still uncertain, still requiring daily choices to make it work. But looking at Dylan's profile as he guided his horse along the creek road, Evelyn felt her heart expand with possibility. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The ranch house stood silhouetted against the sunset as they approached, transformed from the empty shell Evelyn had seen weeks ago into something that felt alive with possibility. Dylan had worked tirelessly in the days leading up to the wedding, and now the windows glowed with lamplight, curtains she'd helped select moving gently in the evening breeze. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cross," Dylan said as he helped her dismount, and the name sent a thrill through her that was equal parts terror and joy. "It feels strange. Good strange, but strange." Evelyn looked up at the house, trying to reconcile the girl she'd been that morning with the woman she was now. "I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream." "If it is, we're both dreaming it." Dylan took her hand, leading her to the front door. "Fair warning. I attempted some domestic touches. Jack said they were terrible, but I think he lacks vision." He opened the door to reveal the main room transformed. Fresh wildflowers and mason jars sat on every surface. Candles flickered throughout, casting warm light over furniture that was still sparse but arranged with obvious care. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the mild evening, and the table was set for two with what appeared to be a home-cooked meal keeping warm. "You did all this?" Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "I had help. Jack's wife came out yesterday and showed me how not to burn down the kitchen." Dylan looked suddenly uncertain. "Is it too much? I wanted it to feel welcoming, but maybe I overdid." Evelyn kissed him, cutting off the worried rambling. "It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole impossible day is perfect." They ate dinner by candlelight, talking and laughing with the easy comfort they'd developed over weeks of daily conversation. But underneath the normalcy ran a current of awareness. This was their wedding night, the beginning of their life as husband and wife, and with it came expectations and vulnerabilities neither had fully voiced. After dinner, as Evelyn helped clear the dishes, Dylan caught her hand. "I need you to know something. There's no rush for anything tonight. We have the rest of our lives. If you need time to adjust, to feel comfortable here." "I'm nervous," Evelyn admitted, "but not afraid. Not of you, not of this. Just nervous about being enough." "You're more than enough. You've always been more than enough." He pulled her close. "We'll figure this out together, just like everything else." The tenderness in his voice, the patience in his eyes, dissolved the last of Evelyn's anxiety. This was Dylan, the man who'd seen her when no one else had, who'd chosen her publicly and irreversibly, who'd built a home for them to share. Whatever came next, they'd navigate it together. Later, lying in the darkness of their bedroom with Dylan's arm around her and the sounds of the ranch settling into night, Evelyn felt something fundamental shift inside her. For 23 years, she'd existed in the narrow space others had carved out for her, the practical daughter, the overlooked sister, the competent clerk. But here, in this bed, in this house, in this life she was building with this man, she could finally expand into the fullness of who she actually was. "What are you thinking?" Dylan's voice was sleepy and content. "That I spent so long making myself small, and now I get to be big. You were always big. You just weren't allowed to show it." He kissed her temple. "No more hiding, Evelyn. Not here. Not with me." "No more hiding," she agreed, and felt the promise settle into her bones like a vow more binding than the ones they'd spoken that afternoon. The first weeks of married life brought adjustments neither had fully anticipated. Evelyn learned that Dylan snored when he was exhausted, that he read poetry before sleep when his mind was troubled, that he had strong opinions about coffee preparation and no opinions whatsoever about household decoration. Dylan discovered that Evelyn was fiercely territorial about kitchen organization, that she woke before dawn regardless of how late she'd stayed up, that she had a dry sense of humor that emerged when she felt safe enough to express it. They also learned to work together. Evelyn took charge of the household management with the same competence she'd applied to the store, implementing systems for everything from meal planning to supply inventory. But she also involved herself in ranch operations, riding out with Dylan to check fence lines, offering opinions on herd management, becoming a true partner rather than merely a supportive wife. "You're better at this than most men I've hired," Jack observed one afternoon as Evelyn pointed out a weak section of fencing that needed reinforcement before winter. "No offense to the boss, but you've got a sharper eye for detail." "None taken," Dylan called from where he was examining a gate. "I married her for her competence, among other qualities."
"Among other qualities," Evelyn repeated dryly. "So romantic. I can be romantic. I brought you wildflowers yesterday."
Bitte. "You brought me wildflowers because you trampled my herb garden and felt guilty." Jack laughed. "Married life is going to be entertaining, I see." But the adjustment wasn't without challenges. 3 weeks into marriage, Evelyn woke in the middle of the night to find Dylan's side of the bed empty. She found him on the porch, staring out at the dark valley, his shoulders tight with tension. "Dylan, what's wrong?" "Couldn't sleep, didn't want to wake you with my tossing." That's not the whole truth. Evelyn wrapped the shawl she'd grabbed around herself and sat beside him. "Talk to me." He was quiet for a long moment. "I had a dream about Sarah, my sister. She was calling for me, and I couldn't reach her. I keep having it, less often now than before, but it still comes." His voice cracked slightly. "And then I wake up in a panic, and I have to check that you're breathing, that you're real, that I haven't lost you too." "Oh, Dylan," Evelyn took his hand. "How often does this happen?" "Once or twice a week. Sometimes more if I'm stressed." He looked at her, vulnerability naked on his face. "I'm sorry. I should have told you before we married, but I was afraid you'd think I was damaged, too broken to—" "Stop." Evelyn's voice was firm. "Everyone carries scars. You lost someone you loved, and you carry that loss. That doesn't make you broken, it makes you human. But when I wake up panicking, checking on you like you're fragile, then I'll remind you that I'm strong and here and not going anywhere." She moved closer, wrapping her arms around him. "We promise to face things together. That includes the hard things, the scary things, the parts that aren't perfect." Dylan held her tightly, and she felt some of the tension drain from his body. "I don't want to suffocate you with worry. You won't. But I need you to tell me when you're struggling instead of carrying it alone. That's what partnership means." They sat on the porch until dawn, talking through fears and establishing patterns for how they'd handle the inevitable rough patches. It wasn't comfortable or easy, but it was real, and that mattered more than comfortable. A month into marriage, Evelyn made her first trip back to town. She'd been so absorbed in establishing her new life that she'd barely thought about Copper Valley. But Margaret had sent word that she needed Evelyn's advice on some store matters, and it seemed like a good opportunity to check in. The town felt different now, or perhaps she was different, viewing it through changed eyes. She was no longer the overlooked clerk, but Mrs. Dylan Cross, wife of one of the area's most promising ranchers. People greeted her with respect that felt both validating and slightly surreal. At the store, Margaret embraced her warmly. "You look happy, different, but happy." "I am. Exhausted and overwhelmed sometimes, but happy." Evelyn looked around the familiar space. "It's strange being here and knowing I don't live upstairs anymore." "Strange for all of us. Rosalie keeps forgetting you're not here to ask questions." Margaret smiled. "Though she's doing better running things than I expected, your teaching paid off." They discussed business matters for an hour, Evelyn offering suggestions refined by her experience managing household accounts. It felt good to be consulted, to have her expertise valued, even in this place that had so often overlooked her contributions. Rosalie arrived mid-afternoon, practically glowing. "Evie, I was hoping you'd come today. I have news." "Let me guess, Charles proposed?" "Last week. We're planning a fall wedding. Nothing as sudden as yours, but still, I'm engaged. Rosalie showed off her ring, a delicate thing with 3 small sapphires. He asked Mama's permission, and everything, very proper. I'm happy for you, truly. Evelyn hugged her sister. He seems like a good man. He is. And I'm trying to be a good woman, one worthy of him, not just pretty decoration, but an actual partner. Rosalie's expression turned serious. I've been helping more at the store, learning the accounts like you did. Charles says his business will need someone who understands numbers and management. I'm realizing I actually like it. Who knew? I knew. You're smarter than you've let people see. Maybe I'm finally ready to be seen, like you. Rosalie squeezed her hand. Thank you for showing me it was possible. As Evelyn prepared to leave, Sarah Connolly entered the store. The moment stretched awkwardly as they faced each other for the first time since the wedding. Mrs. Cross, Sarah said stiffly, congratulations on your marriage. Thank you, Miss Connolly. Evelyn kept her voice neutral. I owe you an apology. My behavior at the dance was inappropriate. I was bitter and petty, and I tried to manipulate a situation that was none of my business. Sarah's face was tight with discomfort, but her words seemed genuine. You and Mr. Cross are clearly well matched, and I was wrong to try to undermine that. The apology was obviously difficult for Sarah to make, and Evelyn found herself respecting the effort even if the past behavior was inexcusable. I appreciate you saying that, and I hope you find what you're looking for, Miss Connolly. The right match, I mean, not another prospect to manipulate. Sarah's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. Fair point. I'll work on that. After Sarah left, Margaret raised her eyebrows. That was shockingly mature of both of you. Oh, no point carrying grudges. Life's too short, and I'm too happy to waste energy on bitterness. Evelyn gathered her purchases. Besides, being angry at Sarah would mean she still has power over me. She doesn't. Riding back to the ranch in the late afternoon light, Evelyn reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. 2 months ago, she'd been trapped in a life that felt like slowly suffocating. Now she was building something new, something entirely her own, or rather, entirely theirs. Dylan was waiting when she arrived home, having finished early with the day's work. How was town? Strange. Good strange. Rosalie's engaged, Sarah apologized, and Mama actually asked my advice. Evelyn dismounted, accepting Dylan's help. I felt like a different person there. Someone who matters. You always mattered. They just finally noticed. He kissed her forehead. Come on, I want to show you something. He led her around the house to where he'd been working on a new structure. A workshop, he'd said, though he'd been secretive about the details. Now she saw why. The building was nearly complete, larger than she'd expected, with excellent windows and a sturdily built door. It's for you, Dylan said. I know you miss running the store, having your own domain to organize and manage. I thought maybe you could use this space for whatever you want. A place to experiment with that herb garden you're trying to establish, or maybe handle the ranch accounts and correspondence. Your space, to do with as you please. Evelyn felt her throat tighten with emotion. You built this for me? With help from Jack, yes. I know I'm not always good with words or grand gestures, but I wanted you to have something that's entirely yours. This ranch is ours, but this building, this is your territory. She walked through the empty space, already imagining possibilities. A work table here, shelves there, maybe eventually equipment for processing herbs or even producing goods to sell in town. A place where the competence and capability that had defined her for so long could flower into something more. It's perfect, she said, turning to Dylan with tears in her eyes. You're perfect. How did I get so lucky? I'm the lucky one. You could have chosen safety. Stayed in town, eventually married someone practical and sensible. Instead, you took a risk on me. He pulled her close. I don't take that for granted. Ever. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in impossible colors, Dylan broached a subject they'd been dancing around. What do you think about the future? Children, I mean. Is that something you want? Evelyn was quiet, considering. I think so. Eventually, but not immediately. I want time to establish myself here, to be your partner in building this ranch before we add the complexity of children. Is that all right with you? More than all right. I want you to have the time and space to become whoever you're meant to be. We rushed into marriage, which I don't regret, but we don't have to rush everything else." He squeezed her hand. "We have time." The summer passed in a blur of work and growth, both personal and agricultural. The ranch began to take shape as more than just purchased land. It became a living operation, with cattle thriving on well-managed pastures and crops, beginning to emerge from fields Dylan had cleared and planted. Word spread that the Cross Ranch was being run with innovative practices, and other ranchers started coming by to observe and ask questions. Dylan handled these visits with grace, but Evelyn noticed that he always included her in the discussions, deferring to her opinions on matters of land management and sustainability. Some visitors were taken aback. Women weren't typically consulted on such matters, but Dylan was unapologetic about his wife's role. "She knows this land better than I do," he told a skeptical neighbor. "And she's got ideas that actually work. You can dismiss her opinions if you want, but you'll be the one losing out." The neighbor took the advice, and within weeks, stories circulated about improvements made following Evelyn's suggestions. Her reputation shifted from overlooked store clerk to cross-ranch partner who knows her business, and she found herself being consulted by other ranch wives looking for advice. It was gratifying, but also exhausting. One evening in late summer, Evelyn collapsed onto the porch bench with a groan. 3 visitors today wanting to know about water management. Then Mrs. Miller stopped by asking my opinion on her kitchen garden. Then Jack needed help with the supply orders because he can't read the supplier's handwriting. She leaned her head back. "I love being useful, but sometimes I miss being invisible." Dylan sat beside her, pulling her feet into his lap and beginning to massage them through her boots. "Want me to turn people away? Tell them to stop bothering you?" "No." "Yes." "Maybe." Evelyn sighed. "I spent so long wanting to be seen and valued. Now I am, and it turns out being visible means everyone wants a piece of you. There's no balance." "Then we'll create balance. 1 day a week, you're off limits unless it's an emergency. That's your day to do whatever you want. Work in your workshop, read, sleep, whatever." His hands moved to her ankles, working out the tension. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Evelyn. You taught me that when I was working myself to exhaustion. Time I returned the favor." She smiled, grateful beyond words for a partner who actually listened. "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being honest about what you need. That's harder than it looks." As summer shifted toward fall, Charles Whitmore and Rosalie's wedding approached. The entire valley was invited, and it promised to be a far more elaborate affair than Evelyn and Dylan's simple ceremony had been. Rosalie had planned every detail with characteristic enthusiasm, and Margaret had thrown herself into the preparations with barely concealed relief that at least one daughter was having a proper wedding. The ceremony was beautiful. Rosalie radiant in white lace, Charles looking at her with genuine devotion. The whole town turned out in their finest. But what struck Evelyn most was the difference in how Rosalie carried herself. There was a groundedness to her sister now, a substance that hadn't existed before. She wasn't just playing the role of beautiful bride. She was genuinely partnering with Charles, already talking about how she'd help manage his business affairs. At the reception, Rosalie pulled Evelyn aside. "I watched you get married and everyone thought you were settling, but you weren't. You were choosing something real over something easy." Rosalie's eyes shimmered with tears. "I wanted that. Not just admiration, but genuine partnership. Charles gives me that. So thank you, Evie, for showing me what was possible. You would have found your way without me." "Maybe, but you made it easier. You were brave first." Rosalie hugged her tightly. "I'm glad we both got our happy endings, even if mine took a little longer to arrange." The winter that followed was harsh, testing everyone in the valley. Snowstorms buried the ranch under feet of white, and temperatures plunged to dangerous lows. Livestock needed constant care, and the simple act of getting from the house to the barn became treacherous. But Evelyn discovered that the hardship brought its own kind of intimacy. Long evenings trapped indoors by weather meant hours of conversation, of reading aloud to each other, of learning the comfortable silence that comes from truly knowing another person. Dylan's nightmares about his sister diminished as he gradually accepted that Evelyn was strong enough to weather both literal and metaphorical storms. One particularly brutal evening, with wind howling around the house and snow piling against the windows, they sat by the fire wrapped in blankets. "Tell me something I don't know about you yet," Dylan said. Evelyn thought carefully. I'm happy, like genuinely, deeply happy, and it scares me sometimes because I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Why does happiness scare you? Because I spent so long not having it. Being content, maybe. Being functional, but not truly happy. She looked at him. What if I get used to this and then lose it? I don't know if I could survive going back. You won't go back. We won't go back. Dylan pulled her closer. But even if something happened, and I'm not saying it will, you'd survive. You're stronger than you think. Stronger than I am, probably. That's not true. Isn't it? You survived being overlooked for 23 years without becoming bitter. You built a life of purpose in circumstances that gave you nothing. You took a risk on marrying a near stranger because you believed in possibility. His voice was warm with admiration. I'm brave about land and cattle, maybe, but you're brave about life itself. The observation settled something in Evelyn, a recognition that strength came in many forms, and hers was just as valuable as the more obvious kinds. Spring arrived with the dramatic suddenness typical of the frontier, snow melting into mud and mud drying into dust within weeks. The ranch emerged from winter stronger than before, cattle having survived well, and the land ready for another planting season. Jack approached Dylan and Evelyn one morning with a proposal. My brother's looking for work. Good hand, reliable, honest. Wondering if you're ready to expand the operation enough to need another full-time worker. Dylan looked at Evelyn, and she recognized the question in his expression. This was a decision point. They could maintain their current size, which was manageable, or they could push for growth, which meant more risk but also more potential. What do you think? Dylan asked her directly in front of Jack. I think we planned for growth. We've spent the year establishing systems and proving the land can support more. If Jack trusts his brother, we should hire him. Evelyn met Dylan's eyes. We didn't build this ranch to stay small and safe. We built it to thrive. They hired Jack's brother Tom, and by summer the ranch was operating at a scale that demanded even more coordination. Evelyn found herself managing increasingly complex logistics, supply orders, scheduling, even handling some of the business correspondence with buyers. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. One afternoon, as she sat in her workshop reconciling accounts, Margaret appeared at the door. I'm not interrupting, am I? Mama, what are you doing here? Evelyn stood, surprised and pleased. Rosalie's managing the store today. I wanted to see you, see how you're living. Margaret looked around the workshop, taking in the organized shelves, the neat desk, the herbs drying in bunches from the rafters. It suits you, this life. It does. I'm tired constantly, and there's always more work than hours, but I'm happy. I can see that. You're glowing with it. Margaret sat in the spare chair, her expression thoughtful. I owe you an apology. A real one, not just words. I spent years teaching you to expect less than you deserved because I was afraid of you being hurt. I limited your dreams before anyone else could. Mama, let me finish. I was wrong. You were always capable of more than I gave you credit for. And when Dylan saw that, when he chose you, I was too caught up in my own fear to celebrate what you deserved to celebrate. Her voice thickened. You were brave enough to reach for more, and I should have supported you instead of warning you away. I'm sorry for that. Evelyn knelt beside her mother's chair, taking her hands. You were trying to protect me. I understand that now. You'd lost Papa. You were raising 2 daughters alone in a harsh place. You did the best you could with what you had. Maybe, but the best I could still hurt you, still taught you to see yourself as less than you were. Margaret squeezed her hands. I'm proud of you, Evelyn. Proud of who you've become. Proud of how you've built this life. Your father would be proud too. They held each other and cried, releasing years of complicated emotions, grief and love and regret, and forgiveness all tangled together. When Margaret left hours later, something had healed between them that Evelyn hadn't even realized was broken. That evening, she told Dylan about the conversation. Your mother came all the way out here just to apologize? And to see how I'm living, to witness that I'm actually thriving, not just surviving. Well, Evelyn leaned against him. It mattered more than I expected. Good. Everyone deserves to be seen by their parents, even if it takes them a while to actually look. He kissed her temple.
Speaking of seeing, I've noticed something. You're different now than when we married, more confident, more willing to take up space. Is that bad? It's perfect. It's exactly what I hoped for. Dylan turned her to face him. When I married you, I married someone with incredible potential that had been compressed into two small spaces. Watching you expand into who you actually are, that's the greatest privilege of my life. Even when I argue with you about ranch management, especially then, it means you trust me enough to disagree. Trust yourself enough to voice different opinions. He grinned. Though I'm right about the water system, and you're being stubborn. I'm being practical. There's a difference. We'll agree to disagree, and then do it your way because you're usually right. Their laughter echoed through the house, comfortable and familiar, and full of the ease that came from truly knowing another person. 1 year into their marriage, Dylan planned a surprise. He'd been secretive for weeks, disappearing into town on mysterious errands and having quiet conversations with Jack that stopped whenever Evelyn approached. On their anniversary, he presented her with a wooden sign, beautifully carved and painted. Cross Ranch, established 1867, built by partnership. The built by partnership part was my addition, Dylan said, because this isn't my ranch that you help with. It's our ranch that we built together. I wanted that acknowledged publicly. But that wasn't the only surprise. He led her to the main road where workers had installed the sign prominently at the ranch entrance, and beneath it, another smaller sign, Evelyn Cross, ranch partner. Evelyn stared at her name carved in wood and displayed for the world to see. Not Dylan Cross's wife, not manager of domestic affairs, but ranch partner. An acknowledgement of her role, her contribution, her visibility. You did this for me? I did it for us. And for anyone who might dismiss your contributions because you're a woman. Dylan stood beside her, looking at the sign with satisfaction. This ranch exists because of both of us. Everyone should know that. That small sign changed something fundamental. Visitors began addressing their questions to both Dylan and Evelyn. Business correspondence came addressed to Cross Ranch partners. The community slowly adjusted its understanding of what a ranch wife could be. Not everyone approved. Some of the older ranchers grumbled about women getting above themselves. A few wives expressed concern that Evelyn was setting a bad example, making them look inadequate by comparison. But increasingly, younger couples began asking advice about partnership models, and Evelyn found herself accidentally becoming a symbol of something larger than herself. I didn't set out to change anything, she told Rosalie during one of their sister visits. I just wanted to be seen as myself. That's how change always starts. One person refusing to be small, then another. Then suddenly, it's a movement. Rosalie, now several months married herself and actively managing Charles's business accounts, smiled. You changed things for me. For the women watching and realizing they could demand more from their marriages. That matters. 2 years into their marriage brought unexpected challenges. A drought threatened the valley, testing every rancher's water management systems. The Cross Ranch, with its careful planning and conservative resource use, weathered it better than most. But watching neighbors struggle, watching some lose cattle, or even be forced to sell land, reminded both Dylan and Evelyn how precarious prosperity always was on the frontier. They opened their spring to neighbors who needed water, worked out sharing arrangements that helped other ranches survive. It cost them, in resources, in time, in the wear on their own systems. But it felt right. We were given knowledge and resources, Evelyn said when Dylan worried they were being taken advantage of. We can share without being depleted. And when we need help someday, and we will, these people will remember. She was right. When a fire threatened their hay storage the following summer, neighbors appeared with buckets and determination, fighting the flames until they were controlled. The community they'd built through generosity returned that generosity when needed. 3 years into marriage, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. The news was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. They'd talked about children, planned for them eventually, but the reality of it felt enormous. Dylan's reaction was complex. He was overjoyed and immediately terrified, his old fears about losing people he loved surging back with new intensity. What if something goes wrong? He asked one night, his hand on her still flat stomach. What if I lose you? I don't think I could survive that. You won't lose me.
I'm healthy, strong, and we have the best midwife in the territory. Evelyn covered his hand with hers. But Dylan, you have to trust that I can do this. I can't spend the pregnancy wrapped in cotton because you're afraid. I know that intellectually, but your heart is terrified. I understand. We'll manage it together. She made him look at her. You have to let me be strong, even when it scares you, especially when it scares you. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Dylan's protective instincts required constant management. He tried to prevent her from doing any ranch work, which was ridiculous and would have driven her mad. They compromised. She'd reduce her physical labor, but remain involved in decision-making and management. Margaret visited frequently, offering advice and support. Rosalie, newly pregnant herself, commiserated about the discomforts and excitement. Even Sarah Connolly, now engaged to a banker from Denver, stopped by once to offer surprisingly sincere congratulations. The baby arrived on a spring morning, after a labor that was hard, but mercifully shorter than many. Dylan paced outside the bedroom, driven to distraction by Evelyn's cries, but forbidden by the midwife from entering until the birth was complete. When he finally saw his daughter, small and red and screaming her displeasure at the world, he wept openly. She's perfect, he said, holding the tiny bundle like she might break. You're perfect. You did this and you're all right, and she's here. We did this, Evelyn corrected, exhausted but exhilarated. We built all of this together. They named her Sarah, after Dylan's sister. It was a gesture of healing, acknowledging the past while celebrating the future. Evelyn watched Dylan hold their daughter and saw years of grief begin to ease, replaced by something lighter and warmer. Motherhood brought its own challenges and adjustments. Evelyn discovered that managing a ranch and a newborn required even more sophisticated systems than managing just the ranch. She also discovered that she could do it, not perfectly, not without exhaustion, but successfully. Dylan proved to be a devoted father, splitting his attention between ranch work and infant care with touching determination. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor during midnight fussing, and talked to baby Sarah about water rights and cattle management like she could understand. You're going to be so confused when you're older, Evelyn told her daughter one evening, watching Dylan explain crop rotation to the uncomprehending infant. You'll think all fathers discuss agricultural policy with babies. All fathers should, Dylan said seriously. How else will she learn proper land stewardship? The ranch continued to thrive. By their 5th anniversary, they'd expanded significantly, hired 3 additional full-time hands, and established a reputation as one of the most innovative operations in the territory. But more importantly, they'd built a partnership that served as a model for others. Young couples came to observe their operation, asking questions about how they divided labor, how they made decisions together, how they balanced marriage and business. Dylan and Evelyn answered honestly. It wasn't always easy, required constant communication, demanded flexibility from both parties, but it worked because they'd built it on a foundation of mutual respect. One evening, sitting on their porch watching 5-year-old Sarah chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Dylan took Evelyn's hand. Do you remember that first day I came into the store? You looked at me like I was just another customer. You were just another customer, a dusty rancher asking about beans and flour. And now here we are, a ranch, a daughter, a life we built from nothing. He squeezed her hand. Sometimes I still can't believe you said yes, that you took a risk on me. You took a risk on me too, on a woman the town had decided wasn't worth noticing. They were all fools, but their foolishness was my gain. He looked at her, his eyes holding the same intensity they had that day in the library years ago. I love you more now than I did when we married. Didn't think that was possible, but every year it grows. I love you too, for seeing me when no one else did, for building a life where I could finally be myself. Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. For choosing me every single day. Always will. Until the day I die. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and Sarah eventually tired herself out, climbing into her father's lap for a story before bed. The ranch stretched around them, fields they'd planted, fences they'd built, a home they'd filled with love and purpose, and the stubborn determination to create something lasting. Evelyn thought about the girl she'd been 7 years ago, invisible, resigned, accepting of scraps. That girl would barely recognize the woman she'd become. The one who managed a successful ranch, raised a daughter, commanded respect from her community, and loved her husband with a depth that sometimes still surprised her. She'd spent 23 years learning to be small, but with Dylan, she'd learned to be expansive, to take up space, to voice opinions, to demand recognition, not because he'd given her permission, but because he'd created space where she could finally give herself permission. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, offering no guarantees. But here, on this land they'd claimed and cultivated, Evelyn had found something she'd stopped believing existed, a place where she was fully seen, fully valued, fully alive. She was no longer the invisible woman in a harsh frontier town. She was a partner, a mother, a force to be reckoned with. And every morning, when she woke to Dylan's steady breathing beside her, and the sounds of their daughter beginning to stir and the ranch waiting for another day's work, Evelyn felt the same quiet certainty that had settled into her bones on their wedding night. This life was hers. She'd earned it, built it, fought for it, and she would never, ever take it for granted. Sarah ran back to the porch, breathless and grass-stained. "Mama, Papa, tell me the story again, about how you met."
Again, Dylan groaned theatrically. "We've told you 100 times." "But I like it. Tell me about when Papa saw Mama for the first time and knew she was special." Dylan and Evelyn exchanged glances, and she saw the warmth in his eyes. The same warmth that had been there that first day in the store, when a dusty rancher had asked about land and water and somehow seen past every defense she'd built to the person underneath. "All right," Evelyn said, pulling her daughter close.
Once upon a time in a dusty frontier town, there was a woman who thought she was invisible. And as she told the story, their story, Evelyn marveled at how far they'd come. From that first meeting to this moment, from strangers to partners to a family, the journey had been terrifying and exhilarating, difficult and rewarding, but most of all, it had been real. In a world that had tried to define her as less than, Evelyn had found someone who saw her as more. And together they'd built something that would outlast them both. A ranch, a family, a legacy of partnership and respect. A proof that being seen, being chosen, being fully yourself wasn't just a dream, but a life that could be lived. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched over this land for centuries. But under their ancient light, something new had been created. A love that had transformed two lonely people into a partnership that redefined what was possible. And that, Evelyn thought as she held her daughter and leaned against her husband, was more than enough. It was everything.